If you were one of those folks who can stay up all night and doesn't fancy early wake-ups, you might have some early human Denisovan DNA in you. Now, don't worry, those guys, who were closely related to the Neanderthals, were pretty cool, and it looks like we've got to thank them for inventing fashion. Plus, if you do have Denisovan DNA in you, you could be better adapted to living at high altitudes, have extra muscle strength and endurance, and a stronger immune system. Scientists first discovered Denisovans in 2008 when they found a small piece of a finger bone in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains. They learned that the bone belonged to a little girl who was between 5 and 7 years old when she passed away around 40,000 years ago. The cold weather in the cave kept the bone in excellent condition. A couple of years later, another team of researchers managed to extract DNA from the find. They compared it to the DNA of modern humans and another ancient human species, Neanderthals. Her DNA was similar to both, but it was also different enough to show that she was part of an entirely new species of humans. No one had known about this group before. They decided to name it Denisovans, after the cave where they found her tiny finger bone. Later, they discovered 3 more Denisovan fossils, including some teeth, also inside the same cave. Scientists also found Denisovan fossils in caves in China and Laos, and one jawbone with teeth on the Tibetan Plateau, over 10,000 feet above sea level. Scholars used a technique called uranium series dating on the mineral stuck to the bone. They discovered that it was 160,000 years old. It proves that Denisovans lived at high altitudes much earlier than anyone thought ancient humans could. For comparison, Neanderthals rarely went higher than 6,000 feet. Scientists had already found a special gene in Denisovan DNA that helps people survive in low-oxygen environments. But the Siberian cave where Denisovans lived was only 2,300 feet above sea level. Today, many people living in high places like Tibet, including Sherpas and other local groups, have this same helpful gene. It likely entered their DNA thousands of years ago when Denisovans and modern humans mixed. Because this gene made it easier to live in thin air, it became very common in those populations over time thanks to natural selection. It looks like the Denisovans also had wider skulls than those of us or Neanderthals. They also appeared to have no chin. They did have sloping foreheads, long faces, and large pelvises like Neanderthals, and a large dental arch like modern humans. Denisovans had narrower lips and shorter yet wider noses than modern humans. The scientific community still doesn't know where the Denisovans came from, but one theory says they were ancestors of Homo erectus. Those were the oldest known early humans who had modern human-like body proportions, with elongated legs and shorter arms compared to the size of the torso. About 700,000 years ago, some of them traveled from Africa to Eurasia, probably not by bus. These travelers were like the great-great-great-grandparents of the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. Scientists believe that these two groups split up, both in where they lived and in their DNA, around 370,000 years ago. The Neanderthals moved west and settled in Europe and some parts of Western Asia. They lived everywhere, from the Atlantic Ocean in Europe to the Altai Mountains. The Denisovans went in the opposite direction, east into East Asia and Southeast Asia. They even traveled to places like the Philippines and Papua New Guinea and crossed the Wallace Line, which separates Asia from Australia. Researchers have found Denisovan DNA in the genetic code of modern humans from Australia and Melanesia. It's a region in the southwestern Pacific Ocean from Papua New Guinea to the Fiji Islands. Now, it's also possible that you have Denisovan DNA if you come from East Asia, although it's less likely. Central and South Americans also have something Denisovan in their genomes. If you want to be sure, you can take a genetic test that will show the exact percentage, if any. Now, Neanderthals and Denisovans lived in places far from the equator, where the amount of daylight changes a lot with the seasons. Modern humans originally lived closer to the equator, where the length of day and night stays almost the same all year. Scientists think that these differences might have influenced how our internal clocks, called circadian rhythms, evolved to help us wake up, go to sleep, and feel energetic at the right times of the day. In 2017, researchers found that some of the genes that affect how people sleep are linked to latitude, how far north or south someone lives. These genes might have helped ancient humans living in northern areas adjust their body clocks to the changing seasons. Scientists studied DNA from 3 Neanderthals, 1 Denisovan, and 1 modern human. Neanderthals and Denisovans who lived in high-latitude areas, where the amount of daylight changes a lot, had genes that helped them adjust to those light cycles. Modern humans in Africa didn't need those same adaptations because their days and nights stayed more consistent. While modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans had children together, some of their descendants inherited Neanderthal genes that made them more likely to be morning people. Scientists think this wasn't just an evolutionary advantage, but rather a way for their body clocks to adjust more quickly to the changing light in high-latitude regions. A faster internal clock might have helped them wake up and go to bed earlier, which made it easier to adapt to new light patterns. The researchers only studied DNA from 4 ancient humans, and it's hard to tell if these changes in circadian genes were only because of light cycles or also due to other factors, like temperature. Another thing Denisovans probably left behind is fashion. Now, researchers discovered the world's earliest sewing needles with tiny holes for threading in Denisova Cave. These needles date back to the last glacial maximum. Before these fancy needles, people living in the cave used simple tools called bone awls, which didn't have holes for thread. These were fine for making basic clothes, but when the weather turned freezing during the Ice Age, they needed better tools to create more layers of clothing to stay warm. The Denisovans designed the first-eyed needles to stitch together more tightly fitted clothing that could trap heat better. These needles were a big step forward because they allowed for fine sewing that could make their clothes not only warmer, but also more comfortable and durable. Plus, clothes became a way for them to express themselves. Before the Ice Age, people showed off their creativity with body paint and other marks. But when they started covering their skin with clothes to stay warm, they lost those canvases for art. So they began to decorate their clothes instead. Using eyed needles, they could sew beads, fur, and other materials onto their garments and turn simple clothes into works of art. Perhaps it was the beginning of bling. Denisovans sound too good to be true, but they might have passed over one mean gene to you. It helps move zinc around in our cells, and this gene was especially helpful to our ancestors who lived in cold places because it helped them survive the frost. But if there's too much or too little zinc in the body, it might make you predisposed to mental health issues. This gene originally came from people in Asia, but over time it spread to people in Europe, the Americas, and all around the world. Scientists are still trying to figure out why the Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared, while we, Homo sapiens, survived. The DNA of our extinct long-distance relatives showed that they lived in small groups and often had families within those groups, which might have caused some problems. Our ancestors live in bigger groups with more people and had genetic diversity. This means that there was a mix of traits that can help stay healthier or adapt to changes in weather. Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't have this advantage. Another thing that helped Homo sapiens was the wide social networks that allowed them to share new ideas and tools. So Denisovans probably just couldn't handle the big changes on Earth and adapt to new habitats and disappeared.
We people used to have real superpowers, but they all disappeared long ago because these abilities became useless and evolution took them away. For example, one of these superpowers was hibernation sleep. Yeah, it doesn't sound as cool as teleportation or flying, but in the modern world, it would be helpful. Imagine that you go to bed before winter and wake up in the spring. No cold weather, no spending money on food at this time, just a long, deep sleep. So perhaps our ancient hominin ancestors, more like primates than humans, could fall into a long hibernation. It was about 500,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years before the appearance of the first Homo sapiens. Hominini of that time lived in caves during the Ice Age and fell into a long sleep to survive. However, this is not a confirmed fact, but scientists have some guesses about it. Paleontologists discovered many fossils of our ancestors in one Spanish cave. The analysis showed that Hominini lacked vitamin D and fat reserves. These strange indicators showed that the inhabitants of these caves could be in a state of hibernation. Perhaps their metabolic processes slowed down and their fat and vitamin reserves were depleted to support life during a long sleep. Of course, such an ability could be useful in the modern world, but it has several disadvantages. Let's look at the example of bears and what problems they can face during hibernation. Unique metabolic processes support their long sleep, but if these processes are violated, then after waking up, the bear can get very sick. This may happen because of an insufficient amount of fat and food reserves. Another ability from the past would help save thousands of dollars for modern people. This ability is strong and healthy teeth. Today, we have dental clinics, high-tech equipment, hundreds of types of toothbrushes and toothpaste, mouthwashes, and much more for the health of our teeth. Despite this, ancient people had stronger and healthier teeth. More powerful jaws and sharp teeth allowed them to chew on hard meat, and the immunity of the oral cavity didn't allow bacteria to develop. But then, agriculture appeared. People started to eat grains. This added new species of bacteria to the oral cavity, weakened the jaw muscles, and provoked cavities. Teeth became more fragile, but they got the most severe blow when people discovered sugar. Sweets added a lot of problems to teeth health. Previously, teeth worked as a tool for processing hard materials, but then we began to eat soft food, meatballs, and fried chicken, and the strength of teeth became meaningless. Evolution took that away from us. Our ancestors were taller, stronger, more agile, and more resilient than we are. A couple of days spent in the fields while hunting mammoths were the equivalent of a month of regular training in the gym. People were not obese. They ate natural food and looked like athletes. But why were they taller? What influenced bone growth? Over the past 10,000 years, the changes in growth were most noticeable. But this trend has changed in our direction in the last few centuries. People have started to get taller. It's difficult to determine the exact cause of such changes. It can be genetics, environment, lifestyle, nutrition, or modern technologies. So, 40,000 years ago, Cro-Magnons hunted and gathered in Europe. They were better developed physically, thanks to this lifestyle. Their ancestors migrated to Europe from Africa, which was the reason for the tall growth. Longer bones were helpful for adaptation to the hot African climate, but after 30,000 years, the growth of people sharply decreased because of the onset of cold weather and the development of agriculture. Our ancestors went through times of famine, and their bodies shrank over time to adapt to a meager diet. In addition, living next to livestock provoked the emergence of new diseases. All of it affected the appearance of ancient people. There are almost no such problems now. You can eat healthy food, receive medical care, and take vitamins. All this allowed us to grow a few inches taller. But one change in the human body still remains a mystery. We have the most advanced civilization in history today. People become professionals in neuroscience and thermonuclear physics, create powerful computers, have access to all the knowledge in the world, and study the boundless depths of space. But for some reason, our brains have become much smaller than those of people who lived several thousand years ago. But how is this possible, given that people were engaged in agriculture, trade, and the manufacture of simple tools in the distant past? Then big cities, architecture, art, and technology began to appear. And all this time, our brain was shrinking while humanity was moving forward. It lost a piece equal to 4 ping pong balls. The reason is not that people were more intelligent in the past. The volume of the brain is not related to intellectual level. It's possible that people's brains have shrunk because of collectivity. To understand what that means, let's take a look at ants. Scientists measured the brain size of some species. They saw that species participating in complex social systems had smaller brains. This means that if an ant interacts closely with other ants, sharing work with them, its brain decreases. Sharing duties with other species contributes to brain shrinkage. Its cognitive abilities are distributed among different groups performing different jobs. It seems like a brain unloads its working and thus becomes smaller. That is, if you live alone on an island, do agriculture, fish, and build a house alone, then your brain becomes bigger. But in a large society, where all these activities are distributed among many locals, the human brain is shrinking. In a sense, intelligence becomes collective. And at what point in time did human intelligence become as collective as possible? When writing appeared. It appeared about 2,000 years before the beginning of brain shrinkage. When people learned to write, they freed up a large memory area in the brain. They didn't have to keep all the necessary things and ideas in their minds. With the development of civilization, the collectivization of humankind grew. And then there was TV and the internet. We will discover how this affects our brains in the future. On the one hand, the volume may decrease even more, but on the other hand, we're surrounded by an endless stream of information. We don't know yet how it will affect the size of the brain. The collectivization of consciousness is only one of the hypotheses according to which our brain has increased. Another theory says that this happened because of the home lifestyle. The brain of a dog, cat, or other pet is smaller than their ancestors who lived in the wild without a human. When people started living in cities and spending less energy on getting food, their brains could also begin to shrink. In addition to the size of the brain, people have undergone many changes. Humanity now shows a huge variety in appearance, which the early Homo sapiens didn't have. In the distant past, they possessed the same physical properties characteristic of a particular region. For example, a short and stocky build was typical for people living in cold conditions. The body area of a small person helps to keep warm better. Also, the body area of a tall person gives off heat more efficiently, so people in warm African regions are taller. And in places where it's scorching during the day and frosts come at night, people can develop the ability to lower their body temperature without feeling cold and shivering. This phenomenon concerns the Australian native tribes living in the central desert. The environment affects external characteristics almost as well as genetics. And over the past 40,000 years, the speed of evolution has increased. The ability to travel and the growth of the people population contributed to the mixing of different ethnic groups across the planet, which also provided diversity in evolution. It seems like humanity still comes to the highest point of our evolution, and perhaps there are no limits to that.
You run through the night forest for more than an hour. You're even faster than a cheetah. You're not tired or cold. You hear a mouse rustling in the roots of a tree and catch all the smells of the forest. With night vision, you see a bird in the night sky. You can go for months without food or water. Gills allow you to swim underwater freely. This is how evolution made humans in a parallel world. Here, they're ideal organisms prepared for anything they might meet in the wild. In our world, things are more complicated. We evolved, but didn't always get stronger. Humans only survived because they adapted and changed the world around them. A human only has 32 teeth. When they fall out, they no longer grow. But evolution doesn't stop. Our food has become softer and more nutritious. You don't need to chew it for a long time. New diet reduced the jaw and enlarged the brain. As a result, there's no room left for the 4 teeth that are closest to the joint. We call them wisdom teeth. In the future, we'll only have 28 teeth, and even today, 35% of people don't have the wisdom teeth. Homo sapiens is the only mammal to have a chin. This is the protrusion along the lower edge of the jawbone. Even our relatives, gorillas and chimpanzees, have their jaws slanted inward. Anthropologists think that the chin is a result of reduction of human face. Perhaps in the past, the chin supported our powerful jaw and enhanced our strength. Over millions of years, the face has shrunk, but the chin has remained. Put your hand on a flat surface, connect your ring finger and thumb, bend your wrist, and you'll see the palmaris longus. 15% of people don't have this muscle already. It doesn't affect the grip strength and has lost its meaning today. Millions of years ago, it allowed our ancestors to deftly climb trees. Evolution deprived us of this useful skill, but the remainder of it remained with us. Dogs, horses, monkeys, and many other animals can move their ears. This allows them to hear better and communicate with each other. Humans have a long, flexible neck, and evolution has left them without this ability. Still, 20% of modern humans can do it. This is another reminder of a time when we weren't much different from other animals. 10% of people have a Darwin's tubercle in their ear. In the past, we had pointy ears looking like the modern macaw's ones, and this little bump is the proof. When an emperor penguin hatches eggs, it doesn't eat for 115 days. Scorpions can stay hungry for a whole year. Evolution hasn't given humans a camel-like hump of fat or the ability to hibernate like a bear. Every morning our ancestors woke up and fought for their survival. We need a lot of energy for this, so we have to eat every day. This isn't very convenient, especially when your food isn't sold in the supermarket but runs away from you through the forest or field. In the human brain, at any given moment, 100 billion neurons work. Thanks to this, you have a good memory and can talk. This is essential for survival. A big brain has a flaw. For neurons to work, it needs a lot of fuel. It makes up just 2.5% of body weight, but consumes 20% of its energy. In 2 hours of playing chess, a grandmaster burns 560 calories. A professional tennis player will spend the same amount of energy in a single hour. Big brains make us weak. Even a small chimp is much stronger than a human. Why do you need muscles if you no longer swing from branches? But you need a big brain to negotiate and cooperate with other people. Got weaker, and we like lying on the couch more and more. This is a comfortable position for thinking. At night, our ancestors were especially vulnerable. When you sleep in a new place, the left side of your brain is more awake than the right one. This brain reaction is called the first night effect. This is an ancient reaction of the body to the dangers that awaited a human in the dark. 40 to 60 million years ago, evolution gave us yet another fear. We're born with the fear of being bitten by a snake or spider. Apparently, these animals were the main danger to the first primates. Anthropologists say we became runners 2 million years ago. Broad shoulders make it convenient to swing your arms and keep balance. A special ligament extends from the spine to the back of the head. It stabilizes the head while running. No primate has strong gluteal muscles. They only turn on to full power when you're running. Hairless and 3 million sweat glands keep our bodies from overheating. People are perfect runners, but evolution has made us slow. You'll never overtake a chimp on a short distance, and that's not mentioning cheetahs. They accelerate to an incredible 70 miles per hour. But almost all land animals are sprinters and don't run for more than 10 to 15 minutes. Humans are adapted for long distances. Walking 2 legs helped our ancestors solve many problems. They freed their hands to carry food or tools. 2 legs and a straight back made our ancestors larger and even scarier for other animals. When you stand on 2 legs, you'll quickly see a saber-toothed tiger, which is waiting for you in the tall grass of the plains or the African savanna. Your body weight is distributed over only 2 limbs, and this has consequences. You can calmly walk down the street, stumble, and get injured over that. Consider this our payment for upright walking. So why do we need toes? Certainly not to hit them on the furniture. When our ancestors lived in the trees, toes helped them cling to branches. Imagine you can work at the computer, draw pictures, or cook scrambled eggs, all with your feet. Cool. But good old evolution has deprived us of this skill. Today, we're not sitting in the trees, but our feet remain flexible. Come to think of it, hooves would be more suitable for us. They're durable and don't need shoes. But until we evolve again, our feet remain fragile. Either of them has 26 bones. This doesn't make our walking or running any safer. You go to the cinema, take your popcorn basket, and start munching on it in anticipation of a great couple of hours. But then you start choking. Those few minutes of coughing and involuntary tears seem to last forever. The human is the only mammal that can choke on its food. We can't eat and breathe at the same time. The reason for this is the structure of our vocal apparatus. Your larynx is down below, thanks to which you can talk, but not while eating. Goosebumps, horripilation, gooseflesh, these are the names of the reflex that makes your skin not smooth but bumpy. This happens when you're cold or scared. Greetings from the Stone Age. Our ancestors were covered in thick hair. When they got scared, the hair follicles rose. This made them large and menacing for other animals. This natural reaction warmed the body as the air grew colder. The body of modern people no longer has long and thick hair. But if that movie is really scary, or you forgot your jacket in the evening, goosebumps still appear. Bears, hedgehogs, bats, some turtles, fish, and insects. All these creatures have one thing in common: they hibernate. Scientists claim that our ancestors were also on this list. In a cave in the north of Spain, researchers found fossilized bones of ancient people. The analysis showed that 500,000 years ago, humans could spend several months hibernating, similar to bears. Thanks to this, they survived Ice Age. Wow, how I miss this skill. Our eyes allow us to see dust in the air and huge mountains on the horizon. We see the world in color and recognize each other's faces. And when it gets darker, our vision quickly adapts to new conditions. But we don't see well in the dark. Evolution hasn't given us the sight of a tarsier. This primate is the size of a baseball and can see perfectly in the dark. Tarsiers could easily catch a beetle flying through the night forest. Still, I wouldn't want my eyes to take up most of my face, and beetles are actually not among my favorite after-dark snacks. How about you?
Whoa, there could have been more human species throughout history than we used to think. In one place in East China, Hualongdong, scientists found the remains of a human who lived around 300,000 years ago. They found a jawbone and parts of the skull. They carefully studied these bones to compare them with the bones of other ancient and modern humans. The remains themselves weren't that unusual. We know our human family is really diverse and has been around for millions of years. You know our ancient relative called Australopithecus, right? These fellas lived in different parts of Africa, and they were known for walking on two legs, just like modern humans. But their brains and some other parts of their bodies made them more similar to apes. Their teeth are a good example of how they were like a mix of apes and modern humans. Their canine teeth were smaller than those of apes, but their back teeth were still larger than ours. There were different types of them. You can recognize some Paranthropus because of their big jaws and teeth. One of the most famous fossils of Australopithecus is Lucy, a lady that's about 3.2 million years old. She was found in Ethiopia. So, we know that our family got pretty big from that point, or probably even before it. But it's always great to welcome some new members, which seemed to be the case with this new discovery. Some parts of these bones look similar to the bones of ancient humans, while other parts look more like the bones modern humans have. For example, the person whose bones they found didn't have a real chin. That means we can't put it in any of the groups we know of, like Neanderthals, or maybe even Homo sapiens. So, might we be missing a branch from the human family tree, or an important step in our evolution? What we're looking at here could be some mix between the creatures that became modern humans like us, and the ones that turned into what we today know as Denisovans. It takes time to figure it all out, though. We hadn't known much about Denisovans either, until we found some of their bones in a cave in the mountains. These bones are really rare, and we only had a few pieces to analyze. But their genes told us a lot more about their past than their fossils. Different kinds of humans lived on this planet, but through time, they spread around. One group started living in Africa. Those are our kind, Homo sapiens. Another group went to Europe. That's how we got Neanderthals. But some of these ancient human groups moved all the way to Asia. That's where we can trace a new interesting kind, Denisovans. It seems they're cousins to both modern humans and Neanderthals. The three species actually shared a common ancestor about 765,000 years ago. It's still not clear why Neanderthals and Denisovans took different paths, but one theory says that it was mostly because the Arctic ice sheet expanded southward all the way to the Black Sea, cutting off Europe from Asia. Life, or better yet, the planet, kept them separated for a very long time. Plus, they kept changing places where they lived all the time, always looking for something better, like every other human species before and after them. But this didn't last forever. Scientists found genes from two groups of Denisovans, one in mainland Asia and the other in a place called Melanesia. So not only did they have different groups within their populations, but it also seems that after thousands and thousands of years of developing independently, the members of these three populations, Neanderthal, Denisovans, and modern humans, somehow met again and spread all across the land. 5% of the Denisovan genome lives not in the area where scientists found their bones, but in people that live thousands of miles away in Southeast Asia, for instance, in Papua New Guinea. But scientists believed that the cave where they found the remains of Denisovans might be as far north as they had lived. It would have been way too cold for them to survive if they had gone further north. From there, they traveled as far south as Indonesia. This was possible because, during their time, sea levels were lower than today. So Indonesia was connected to mainland Asia. But they probably didn't make it to Australia since it was still separated by water. These three groups mixed together too. Scientists have found a bone of a girl who had a Neanderthal mom and a Denisovan dad. It's the only first-generation hybrid human we've discovered. She even got a cool nickname, Denny. One of the mysteries about Denisovans is how they disappeared. Maybe they mixed so much with other humans that they just blended in. Or it's possible that modern humans' ancestors were stronger, had better tools, or even brought some diseases that didn't affect them, but affect Denisovans. Climate and where they lived might have also played a role. Denisovans lived in a wide range of environments, from cold parts of Asia to tropical Indonesia. Climate changes and the challenges of different habitats might have been really difficult to survive. But it's hard to draw strict lines in our family tree. We're still relatively new at learning about it anyway. Who knows how many new members we are about to discover? Half a century ago, a team of scientists had an idea that a collection of fossils they found at the Great Rift Valley in Tanzania were actually the remains of some new human species. Yup. That was the time when we welcomed Homo habilis into the family. It was a big discovery at that time since people mostly believed that the story of our evolution had been really simple. First, there were Australopiths that looked like apes. After them, there was Homo erectus, the upright man. They most likely lived in Africa around 2 million years ago, but also expanded really quickly across Eurasia. It was the first human species that we know about to have traveled such long distances to find a better place for life. They looked and behaved like humans. Plus, they were probably the first of our ancient ancestors who learned how to deal with fire. Maybe they were the first to cook food as well, and that's what we're definitely thankful for. Cooking food was an innovation that made the human diet more nutritive, and we could grow bigger and smarter brains. So, yeah, Homo habilis made things more complicated. They could walk on 2 legs, but they could also be better at climbing trees than walking on the ground like us. Plus, their brains were smaller than what a human should probably have. At first, it seemed these fossils could be from a completely different side of the family, related to other creatures, Australopithecus africanus, that looked like apes. But more and more digging showed that even though its jaws and teeth were similar, Homo habilis was still bigger and a bit different. The name means handy man, because they were probably able to make and use simple tools. Searching for more fossils in Africa wasn't easy because a team of researchers had to deal with wild animals and tough conditions all the time. But eventually, they managed to find some teeth and a strange skull that was, again, something different from the ancestors we knew about. The teeth were really big, so this new fella got the nickname of Nutcracker Man. For a long time, everyone believed this kind had evolved to eat hard foods. But the fossil teeth didn't show much damage, so they might have been eating food that was softer than we thought. This finding might help us understand how our teeth have been evolving through time, too. And right there, in the same layers of soil where Nutcracker Man was lying, they found ancient stone tools. At first they thought those had belonged to Nutcracker, but as they kept digging, they found more fossils that didn't match Nutcracker Man. It means that someone else must be the real tool maker. But that's another story for another time.
Admit it, whenever you think about Neanderthals, you picture these large, human-like creatures wandering around, bumping their heads, afraid of fire, and making weird noises. That's really far from the truth. There's actually more Neanderthal DNA in your genome than you know. It's estimated that up to 4% of the DNA of some modern humans can be traced back to Neanderthals. If you have no idea who these people were, let me get you up to speed. The Neanderthal was a species of early humans that lived in Europe and Western Asia as early as 200,000 years ago. As for their appearance, they looked sort of like us, but they were physically stronger. Their skeleton was also more durable and able to cope with the harsh environment. I mean, 200,000 years ago, people didn't live in houses or apartment complexes. So, their bodies needed to be able to survive in the wild. What's even more surprising is that their brain was larger than ours. But did that make them smarter? To answer that question, let's look at how these people lived back then. Neanderthals were hunter-gatherers, meaning they had to hunt and search for food. Back in their prime years, farming wasn't la mode yet. They were skilled at making tools and objects to protect themselves with, like spears and stone knives. They used these things to hunt animals, yes, but also to make clothing. And speaking of garments, a new study showed that Neanderthals might have been more fashionable than we'd previously suspected. These recent findings show that they may have been skilled in using plants to create yarn. This is based on the discovery of pieces of fabric from over 50,000 years ago in parts of Europe, where Neanderthals used to live. This is really important because it's rare for archaeologists to find perishable artifacts, such as plant products. Most of the things we find these days from previous eras are pottery and pieces of rocks and bones because they can better resist the test of time. Researchers used a special microscope to examine a cord fragment made of twisted fibers, which may have been used for a tool or net. Since it looks like they were able to twist plant fibers into making a cord, Neanderthals had probably been much smarter than we thought. It shows that they had great observational skills and were great at picking out which sort of plant was better to use. They also used fires to keep warm and cook food. It looks like Neanderthals were able to make use of flames that popped out spontaneously, but were not able to create them consistently. Scientists have looked at some Neanderthal sites and found large amounts of ash. That means they had to constantly maintain a fire because they were unable to start it again if it went out. Other specialists believe Neanderthals did use fire, but they did not necessarily need it due to their physical abilities, which allowed them to handle cold temperatures better than modern humans. So, what did Neanderthals eat? Scientists have been able to get a glimpse into their menu, but that's only because these ancient creatures had this nasty habit. They didn't brush their teeth. If you don't brush your teeth regularly, a film called dental plaque will form on the surface of your pearly whites. Over time, this plaque will harden and turn into tartar or dental calculus, which is a combination of minerals, microbes, and leftover pieces of food. scientists can use bits of the material trapped in dental calculus on fossils to study what our distant cousins ate and what their lifestyles were like. They can also examine ancient DNA to determine the species of microbes present in the mouth of a Neanderthal. Turns out that those living in Belgium ate mostly meat, including woolly rhinoceros and wild sheep, according to the DNA found in their teeth. On the other hand, the Neanderthals found in the El Cedron cave in Spain had a more plant-based diet, including mushrooms, pine nuts, moss, and tree bark. Other Neanderthals from different locations also showed consistent evidence of eating plants. One of the Spanish Neanderthals even had dental problems, and the researchers found evidence of medicinal plants in his teeth. He may have been trying to treat his pain. Another study performed at the University of York found that Neanderthals had some sort of prehistoric healthcare system. It worked regardless of how bad the injury or illness was. The research suggests that this care was provided out of real concern rather than self-interest. This challenges the stereotypical image of Neanderthals as brutes and selfish creatures compared to modern humans. The study found that many Neanderthals had severe injuries requiring ongoing care, such as massage, fever management, and hygiene. One individual, who was around 25 to 40 years old at the time of his passing, had a degenerative disease that likely severely limited his ability to contribute to the group. Despite this, he was carefully buried, which shows that he remained an important part of the group, despite not being able to contribute much to the daily workload. In case you're wondering, Neanderthals aren't technically our direct ancestors. They're sort of a distant relative, if you'd like, because some of them lived at the same time as modern humans. We coexisted for thousands of years, with Neanderthals living in Europe and Western Asia, and modern humans spreading out of Africa around 50,000 years ago. There is evidence that the two species interacted and even interbred. That's why some humans today have Neanderthal DNA in their genetic makeup. However, the precise nature of their relationship is still debated among scientists. Despite their physical advantages, Neanderthals eventually went extinct. Some people think Neanderthals as a species were not successful because they disappeared a long time ago, but they actually did very well. They lived in difficult conditions for a very long time, much longer than modern humans have been around. Modern humans have only been around for about 100,000 years or so, and only started living in cold areas about 40,000 years ago. There are many factors that may have led to the extinction of Neanderthals. It is believed that changes in their natural climate and competition with modern humans were two of the main reasons. Neanderthals specialized in hunting certain animals, but when those animals went extinct, they may have struggled to find food. Additionally, modern humans had advantages, such as trade networks and better technology, including sewing needles or bows and arrows, which may have given them a competitive edge. Although there is no evidence of direct conflict between the two species, it is known that they interacted. Some people even believe that Neanderthals did not fully go extinct, since their traces of their DNA can still be found in some people. So, what if the Neanderthals hadn't gone extinct? Charles Darwin pointed out that many of the unique traits of humans, like emotions, intelligence, language, and social behavior, can also be seen in some form in other animals. Our closest relatives, such as Homo erectus and Neanderthals, were also quite similar to us. However, Homo sapiens are the only surviving members of the hominin group, which includes around 20 known and potentially many more unknown species of humans and human-like apes. Even if the Neanderthals had survived, they would have probably integrated into society and evolved at the same time as modern humans did. One theory suggests that since they were outnumbered at one point by Homo sapiens, their traits would have eventually merged with ours. Those less advantageous, like their inability to produce fire, would have disappeared over generations. Other theories suggest that maybe they wouldn't have wanted anything to do with us. Looking at our differences rather than our similarities, maybe they would have developed their own communities, choosing to live separately from the modern world. Either way, it's hard to predict how a species that disappeared so many years ago would behave today. But what we do know is that you need to think twice next time you want to call someone acting weird a Neanderthal. Your DNA might make you the Neanderthal in the room.
Throughout time, scientists have managed to uncover about 6,000 early human fossils, ranging from skulls to teeth. For some of these fossils, it was a breeze. Researchers could instantly identify them as belonging to, say, the Neanderthals. However, when it came to others, things got a bit trickier. Some fossils just didn't fit into any existing categories. So, what categories of prehistoric humans do we actually know about? Well, up until recently, we recognized 8 different species of early humans. One of these is Homo habilis, which means handyman. You'll recall that Homo is Latin for human. They resembled regular primates, but were pivotal in our evolution. They were the first to create stone tools, which significantly aided their daily activities, such as butchering. Next up, we have Homo rodolfensis. These guys were larger than Homo habilis and boasted bigger brains, but they were still quite distant from modern humans. For example, even though the neurological structure of their brains was becoming more complex, they were probably not capable of using any form of actual spoken language. Then came Homo erectus, the first to walk upright, followed by Homo antecessor, which is considered the last common ancestor of modern humans and Neanderthals, along with a host of other Homo species. Meanwhile, we're still piecing together the story of the enigmatic Denisovans. Our knowledge of Homo naledi is pretty limited too, since it was only discovered in 2013, and it is species number 8. Interestingly, Naledi means star in the Sotho language because they were found in a cave called Rising Star. Scientists were taken aback by them. Everything suggested they were around 2 million years old. But after closer examination and some tests, it turns out that the Naledi species is much younger, between 236 and 335,000 years old. Their hands were adapted to making tools, yet no tools have been found nearby. Long story short, they're a puzzling species, and there's still so much more to learn about them. So even though today we have only one human species on our planet, Homo sapiens, we continue to discover ancient species that are long gone. Now, you might wonder why researchers study these extinct species. The truth is, they need this knowledge to piece together the intricate narrative of our prehistoric past. In 2024, a significant discovery emerged, the 9th human species, named Homo juluensis, which translates to large-headed. Researchers suggest that this species hunted wild horses, crafted stone tools, and processed animal hides to survive harsh winters. A researcher from the University of Hawaii noted that the discovery of this potential new species came about while his team was developing a novel method for classifying fossil evidence. Interestingly, one potential representative of Homo juluensis isn't entirely new to science. The Denisovans, first identified in 2010 through DNA analysis of a finger bone found in Siberia, have yet to be classified as a distinct species. Some scientists propose that they may actually belong to this newly identified group. These big-headed individuals could help shed light on the long-standing mysteries surrounding these hominin fossils, which have puzzled researchers due to their mixed characteristics of Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. You see, sometimes it's tough to call a spade when you don't even know what a spade looks like. You get the idea? Many unsolved mysteries linger, simply because scientists haven't had this crucial, big-headed piece of the puzzle. So theoretically, we modern humans could also be considered a bit of Homo juluensis. You don't believe me? Well, watch this. We need to consider 2 key facts for this equation. First, there are the Denisovans, a group we might refer to as Homo juluensis from a scientific perspective. Yeah, this is just a theory proposed by some researchers, but let's roll with it for now and pretend it's a fact. Second, it's important to know that the Denisovans interbred with the ancestors of modern-day Melanesians. These folks inhabit areas ranging from New Guinea to the Fiji Islands and carry between 4 and 6% Denisovan DNA. Now, you might not personally have those genes, unless you've been tested, of course, but the key takeaway here is that there are modern humans today who share genetic links with the Denisovans, or Homo juluensis, or big heads if you prefer. Now, that all sounds pretty plausible. Let's unpack step by step how it happened. Researchers have uncovered this type of ancient human, known as the Denisovans, based on skeletal remains found in Siberia. These ancient humans coexisted and interbred with modern humans, adding yet another layer to our understanding of human evolution. Named after the Siberian caves where their fossils were discovered, the Denisovans are believed to have roamed widely across Eurasia. Evidence indicates that the Denisovans lived alongside Neanderthals and interacted with early Homo sapiens, possibly around 50,000 years ago. A team of scientists successfully sequenced a complete genome from these ancient hominins using nuclear DNA extracted from a finger bone. This discovery reveals that at least 4 distinct human groups existed during the time when anatomically modern humans began migrating out of Africa. Alongside modern humans and Neanderthals, we now have to consider the Denisovans and another small human species from Indonesia, often referred to as the Hobbit, when discussing our evolutionary history. One intriguing question that arises is why Denisovan genes are predominantly found in modern Melanesians, yet absent from other Eurasian populations. Remember that 4 to 6%? One hypothesis suggests that interactions between the Denisovans and early modern humans were limited and brief, especially as humans migrated throughout Southeast Asia into Melanesia. Scientists speculate that only a small number of the Denisovans may have interbred with a larger group of modern humans. This could explain how the Denisovan genes made their way into the gene pool despite the likelihood of infrequent encounters. Anyway, the more scientists dig into our past, the more fascinating things they uncover about our ancestors. Take Neanderthals, for example. Did you know these guys were responsible for creating the very first piece of art ever? I had no idea. But a 2018 study of ancient cave art in Spain revealed what are now considered the oldest known artistic creations. We used to think Neanderthals lacked the cognitive skills needed for art, but it turns out they were actual art pioneers. Not only did they create art, but they also seem to have invented hashtags thousands of years before Chris Messina did it in 2007. Right, I'm kidding, but you'll soon get why I mention hashtags. The artworks found in several caves in Spain include simple hand stencils, a ladder-like drawing, and various other markings. Until recently, these prehistoric pieces were believed to have been made by early humans. But new testing methods suggest they're much older than we thought. Above all, the earliest recognized Neanderthal artwork, which looks like a hashtag, was discovered in Gibraltar back in 2014. To determine the age of these artworks, scientists employed advanced dating techniques using eHarmony and Match.com. Oops, wait a minute, wrong dating techniques. They actually used uranium and thorium radioisotopes instead of the traditional carbon dating. Once the necessary tests were completed, they confirmed the art was approximately 65,000 years old, 15,000 years older than the previously oldest known art from Indonesia. At that time, the only species around were Neanderthals, so it's safe to say they were behind these creations. Modern humans didn't arrive in Spain until about 20,000 years later. Hey, it was a long commute. That rules them out as the hashtag creators. The hand stencil was likely created intentionally, with the artist preparing the pigment and applying it over their hand. Plus, the caves also contain a collection of painted seashells that are an astonishing 115,000 years old. Some of these shells have been drilled, suggesting they might have been used as jewelry. Some specialists argue that the fact Neanderthals created art hints that they might have also had some form of spoken language. So maybe it's time we fully embrace Neanderthals as part of our lineage. They're humans too, just a different branch of our family tree. While these findings are intriguing, some experts remain skeptical about the new dating methods, claiming they're not entirely convinced. Hey, what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Let's embark on a wild thought experiment. What if we could magically travel to all our ancestors in chronological order? Could we talk to them and actually form some connection? And just how far back can we go while still connecting with them? Well, let's see. Primates were the funky cousins of other mammals. Around 85 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, they went their own way and became the first of their kind. Human evolution is very complicated, and we can't draw a distinctive line on where it started. But we're going to start with hominins. Hominins are a group of primates that include all the species leading up to Homo sapiens. So, imagine you hopped in your super cool time machine and landed in the past, way back when hominins were chilling around. What would happen? First off, you'd spot these quirky creatures roaming around with their short, hairy bodies, curious faces, and big eyes. They might look a bit different from you, but that's part of the fun. They were excellent climbers and incredibly curious about the outer world. They munched on fruits, nuts, and whatever they found in nature. And yes, surprisingly, humans aren't meat eaters by nature. Originally, we all were vegans. Of course, with them, you can forget about proper communication. But still, primates are incredibly smart. So, a good old game of charades could do the trick. Mime your way into their hearts with friendly gestures, and they'll be thrilled to see a futuristic traveler like you. These hominins were curious beings, so they'd probably be very interested in you if you were friendly with them and gave them some food. Next, let's move on to Homo habilis and Homo erectus. Their period, the Stone Age, started about 2.6 million years ago. As you can guess, it was the time when we started using stone tools. The Stone Age lasted for roughly 3.4 million years and ended between 4000 BCE and 2000 BCE. It ended with the beginning of metalworking. Homo habilis, or handyman, was like the MacGyvers of the Stone Age. These crafty creatures were the first to use stone tools. And Homo erectus was the upright man. They were a bit more recent. As their name suggests, they were the first to walk on two legs like us. They might have looked a bit different from modern humans, but still. So what were their lives like? Well, they still were true survivors. Homo erectus loved to explore and tinker with things. They made simple stone tools, like sharp rocks for cutting and scraping. They were basically the early inventors. Homo erectus was quite adventurous. They left Africa and traveled to far-off lands, exploring new territories. They were the first ones to set foot in places like Asia and Europe. They lived in caves or simple shelters made of sticks and animal hides. And let's not forget their wild fashion sense. Animal skins and leaves were their trendy outfits. But don't think they just sat around all day. They were hunters and gatherers, seeking out delicious fruits, nuts, and even hunting animals. How would you communicate with them? Well, they used simple grunts, gestures, and body language to understand each other. So, if you met Homo habilis and Homo erectus, you'd be in for a wild ride. You could show them some advanced technology to impress them and teach them some new cool tricks. Next on our list are Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals. Homo heidelbergensis was like the cool older cousin of Neanderthals and us. They lived around 800,000 to 200,000 years ago. Picture them as sturdy and strong, with big brains compared to their earlier relatives. They were expert toolmakers and loved exploring new places. The Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia from 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. Neanderthals were super smart, and they had awesome adaptations to cold weather. With their thick, strong bodies and big noses, they could handle chilly winters like champs. Both Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals were skilled hunters and gatherers. They'd chase after mammoths and other big game with sharp spears they crafted themselves. But it wasn't all rough and tough. They knew how to have fun too. Neanderthals made art and showed their emotions and connections with each other. With these folks, you could draw pictures in the dirt, dance around, and make gestures. They'd get the idea. And finally, we meet Homo sapiens. Picture this. You're waking up in a cave with your family, trying to keep warm by a flickering fire. The cave is pretty cozy, isn't it? But nope, no permanent homes here. You're part of a nomadic tribe, moving wherever the food is best. Hey, but at least you've got some nifty tools to survive. Grab your awesome handmade spear, crafted by watching others or maybe invented by your genius self. Time to go hunting mammoths. And if mammoths aren't cooperating, just gather nuts, berries, and bird eggs. Stone Age humans were real foodies. They made flour from oats and spiced things up with wild onions and mustard seeds. There were artists too. Using minerals and bones, they created stunning images and even flutes for some musical entertainment around the campfire. You still can only talk in body language and facial expressions. But Homo sapiens were smarter than their ancestors. So you could even teach them basic gestures and their meaning, like hands up for mammoth and stuff. Maybe try doing a funky dance or a happy jig. That would get their attention for sure. But this wouldn't be the only way to communicate. Stone Age peeps loved drawing and making flutes, so you could totally join in on the creative fun. Show off your artistic skills with a drawing or two, or maybe even play some tunes. Don't worry, they would be impressed by your skills, even if you aren't that far away from them. But tools are definitely the way to their hearts. If you brought some handy gadgets or cool inventions from our time, they'd be super impressed. Just create some simple tool from the future that can make their lives easier, and they'll love you instantly. So, while you might not be having deep philosophical debates with the Stone Age crew, you can still share some good times. Learning is the way to go. Besides, even though life was shorter back then, averaging around 30 years, it's still enough time to find a partner and have kids. Though, the dating pool might be a bit limited. So let's leave that topic for another time. Just hold on to that axe at night because, well, sometimes our ancestors would eat each other and like to do some head-dumping battles. Yikes. Let's finish our journey with the Bronze Age, just for fun. This cool era lasted from around 3300 to around 1200 BCE. And guess what? They were all about that strong metal called bronze. It's the time when people got creative and started using bronze to make all sorts of cool things. Bronze is a combo of copper and tin, making it harder and more durable than anything else at the time. Awesome civilizations started popping up all over the place. They either made their own bronze by smelting copper and mixing it with tin, or traded for it with other places. So, as you step into this ancient era, you'll be amazed by the sight of bustling Bronze Age cities with majestic bronze gates, amazing markets, and grand temples dedicated to powerful gods. During the Bronze Age, we finally developed languages and writing. Mesopotamia and Egypt were leading the way with their fancy cuneiform and hieroglyphs, the earliest writing systems ever. They were basically the kings of calligraphy. Remember, the language might be a bit different. You'd be hearing unfamiliar words. But with these humans, you can at least use drawings, art, and many other things to communicate. Anyway, this is what meeting our ancestors would be like. What a wild journey through time. So, remember to cherish our past and appreciate the wonders of our modern world. Stay tuned.
There's an amazing place in Ethiopia, East Africa, called Hadar. This place is a treasure trove. We found tons of old animal fossils there. And among those remnants, we discovered something very special: the fossils of a creature called Australopithecus afarensis. One of these guys was found almost complete. You might know it today by the name Lucy, after a famous song by the Beatles. Lucy was a small lady, only about as tall as a kitchen counter. She lived 3.2 million years ago and became a huge celebrity when we found her in 1974. She helped us learn more about our early ancestors, creatures called Australopithecines. Around 10 to 12 million years ago, there was a group of animals that broke into two branches. One of the branches led to modern apes, while the other led to humans. This separation happened because one group decided to stay in trees and became what we now call gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans. They moved around using all four limbs and lived in forests. But the other group decided to live on the ground and try walking on two legs. Because of that, their brains started getting bigger over time. And over millions of years, they became bald monkeys who watch videos on YouTube. Yeah, you know who you are. Lucy, like other Australopiths, was a bit different from us. She still looked like an ape and lived during a transitional stage. She could walk on two legs, but didn't do it all the time. Sometimes she climbed trees, just like a monkey. She and her buddies were the first step in human evolution. Then came a new branch of evolution, Homo habilis, or handyman. They were the first members of the Homo genus because they were the ones to start developing stone tools and first show human creativity. They probably used these tools for scavenging and processing food. We found the first clues about them back in the 1960s. They walked around East Africa about 3 million years ago. They were pretty small, about 4 feet 7 inches tall. They didn't climb trees anymore and mostly walked on the ground. Their skull shape already resembled ours, unlike the more pear-shaped heads of Australopiths. That's because they had larger brains. After them, we had Homo erectus, the upright man. They lived about 2 million to 70,000 years ago. The name hints that this was the first hominin species that walked on two legs almost all the time. They were also the first to migrate out of Africa, spreading to Asia and Europe. And here, we had the real breakthrough. Representatives of Homo erectus had even larger brains and learned to make more creative and advanced tools. They created the first choppers, cleavers, and hammers, and used flakes as scrapers and knives. They probably used a lot of things, wood, bark, and even grass to make the first strings and ropes. With all that, they learned how to hunt large animals and probably hunted together a lot. They were also the first ones to start using fire, which changed our history forever. Over time, more Homo species emerged, including the famous Neanderthals. They're known for their European roots. They split from our common ancestor around 400,000 years ago. Now, even though we share one common ancestor, we didn't evolve from Neanderthals. They were a separate branch. All Neanderthals went extinct, but our evolutionary branch coexisted with them a long time ago. Neanderthals were resourceful, hunting both land and sea creatures. They left behind thousands of stone tools and even decorated caves with paintings. They had their own ceremonies, too. They started to bury those who passed away. They probably noticed that leaving them in the wild leads to spreading diseases and attracting scavengers. But they also showed care and love in their burial rituals. Then it was time for archaic Homo sapiens. They lived around 500,000 to 200,000 years ago, emerging in Africa and Europe. This was the last leg between our ancestors and our modern species, Homo sapiens. The brain just kept getting bigger. They started to show more complex behaviors, not only burial and interesting stone tools, but also smart hunting strategies and planning for the future. They probably had a diverse diet that included both hunting and gathering. And finally, we reached the anatomically modern Homo sapiens. They emerged around 200,000 years ago in Africa. They had a similar skeletal structure and brain size to modern humans, and their behavior was pretty close to ours. They had complex social structures, started thinking in symbols, and so on. They migrated out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, spreading across the globe and eventually replacing other hominin species, such as Neanderthals. They started to create their first languages and form their first words. The first words were probably very simple, like "ah" to call someone and "ma" for babies. After evolving into our final stage, we started advancing in our cultural and technological development. This development became very rapid over the last 200,000 years. About 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic period, also known as the New Stone Age, began. It marked the end of the glacial period. Humans started living in settled villages instead of constantly moving around. This change was brought about by the advent of agriculture, which allowed people to grow crops and raise animals like goats and sheep. Early humans started to domesticate animals, such as sheepdogs, for herding. We also started making the first art, leaving famous drawings in caves, handprints, animals, mostly cows, hunting, and many others. We even created the first currency. We began using clay tokens for transactions. This marked the beginning of commerce and the use of money. And finally, we started writing. And now the events could be recorded and passed down through written records. This is when history officially began. From that point on, we saw the development of agriculture, the rise of complex societies, the invention of writing and the wheel, and the emergence of civilizations. Our tools became more and more sophisticated, languages appeared, leading to the diverse cultures and societies seen today. So, why have we stopped evolving? The truth is, we haven't. Human evolution is an ongoing process, although it's not as dramatic as it used to be. We adapt to different environments, have different skin tones, appearances, body sizes, and genetic mutations that have influenced traits like lactose intolerance or resistance to certain diseases. But the world we live in today is very different from the one our ancestors inhabited. We don't suffer as much because we've developed technology, culture, and social systems. Thanks to this, evolution slowed down, seeing that we're doing okay as we are now. What we started experiencing is cultural evolution rather than a physical one. Plus, 200,000 years is a pretty short time period, considering the time span of the universe or even of our Earth. We should see what happens to us in hundreds of thousands of years. I won't be around then, but there are some theories about that. There's a big idea that, in the future, humans and machines might merge into one super being. We call it technological singularity, a state where we humans lead our technologies to the point where we won't be able to control their development anymore. For example, if AI gets so advanced, it will change everything about how we live. Despite the current rise of AI, we shouldn't be too worried about it taking over the world, at least not in the next few decades. All we've developed now is weak artificial intelligence, little simulations. They might look scary to those who don't know much about AI, but the truth is, they have yet far to go before they reach the grand complexity of the human brain, not to mention consciousness. However, many people believe it's only a matter of time before AI reaches this level of intelligence, and then our world might change forever. There are other possibilities too. For example, one day we might reach a level where we merge with machines and learn to upload our consciousness in the cloud. In that case, we might become a hive mind, taking over the internet using our brains, becoming one giant consciousness. No matter what happens in the future, one thing's certain: technology is changing fast, and it's going to affect all of us, sooner or later. Deep in the heart of the Large Hadron Collider near Geneva, Switzerland, scientists have embarked on a journey to unlock the secrets of the universe. They've searched for the elusive Higgs Boson, a particle that holds the key to understanding the universe itself. And after years of tireless experimentation, the impossible became possible. They finally discovered it. They uncovered a piece of the cosmic puzzle that had eluded us for decades. But what even is the Higgs Boson? And why has that changed our understanding of the universe forever? And should you even care? Yes, you should. Just stick with me here. First of all, according to the standard model of physics, the universe is made up of tiny building blocks called particles. You know those: protons, neutrons, and muons. Wait, probably not that last one. Let's scratch it. Anyway, the Higgs boson is the fundamental particle associated with the Higgs field. a field that gives mass to other fundamental particles such as electrons and quarks, which is not the sound that a duck makes, but close. First of all, let's describe the Higgs field. This is one of the fundamental fields of the universe, just like the electromagnetic field, for example, the one that gives us light and electricity. It's like a big, invisible ocean of energy that fills all of the space around us. And just like a real ocean, it has waves and currents. But instead of water, the Higgs field is made up of Higgs bosons. Now imagine you're a tiny little particle swimming through this ocean. Just like a boat in the water, you'll feel resistance as you move through the Higgs field. Some of these particles are like speedboats. They can zip through the Higgs field without feeling much resistance at all. And others, for example the W and Z bosons, are more like giant cruise ships. They're big and heavy, so they feel a lot of resistance as they move through the Higgs field. And that resistance is what gives particles mass. The speedboats that slide easily don't pick up any mass, but giant cruise ships interact with the field more strongly and pick up a lot of mass. Now let's describe that more, scientifically. When a particle interacts with the Higgs field, it creates a disturbance in the field, and this disturbance can be thought of as a Higgs boson. And the disturbance that it creates in the Higgs field is what gives mass to the interacting particle. Basically, without this field and the Higgs boson, tiny blocks of our universe, like protons and neutrons, wouldn't have the mass they need to make up atoms. Atoms wouldn't be able to form molecules. And without molecules, you wouldn't have anything. No matter, no stars, no planets, no life as we know it. Not even bright side. Ooh, makes me shudder. So not only is the Higgs boson incredibly important, but it's also mysterious and fascinating. That's where it got its beautiful holy nickname from. The Higgs boson was first proposed in the 1960s by a physicist Peter Higgs. Good thing his last name wasn't Bozo. Imagine the Bozo boson. Anyway, Dr. Higgs was part of the group of brilliant scientists who were seeking to understand all the different types of particles that make it up. They noticed that some of them, like the photon, which carries light, don't have mass. But others, like the W and Z bosons, do. And they were like, wait a minute, how is this possible? That's when they generated two ideas, the Higgs boson and the Higgs field. But in order to confirm this theory, we needed some proof. And since we can't see the invisible field itself, we needed to find and track at least one Higgs boson. And finding it was an incredibly hard task, like a real-life game of Where's Waldo? All because the Higgs boson is very rare, very short-lived, and doesn't interact with other particles very often. Yep, it's just like me at parties. The Higgs boson is born when a particle passes through the Higgs field and decays almost immediately after that. Now, you may remember how much the science world rejoiced when they were finally able to discover it. That's because it took decades. First of all, this task was taken up by CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. They were using the Large Hadron Collider, or the LHC for short. This is the largest and most powerful particle accelerator in the world, located near Geneva, Switzerland. It smashes protons together at incredibly high speeds, recreating conditions that existed just after the Big Bang. This giant machine tries to find new particles and helps us to understand the universe better. Anyway, the team at CERN used the LHC to generate trillions of proton collisions, searching for the telltale signs of the Higgs boson. But with so many collisions happening at once, it was like searching for a needle in the haystack the size of a small country. The search for the Higgs boson was a long and exciting journey that took decades of work and the collaboration of thousands of scientists from all over the world. And after years of searching, they finally found it, the evidence of the Higgs boson. The discovery was announced on July 4, 2012, and it was major news in the science world. It was celebrated by a lot of parties and events in CERN. But it wasn't over yet. The discovery of the Higgs boson had to be confirmed. So the scientists continued to study it and collect more data. And in 2013, they announced that the Higgs boson had been confirmed with a high level of certainty. This discovery was a really big deal because it confirmed a key part of the standard model of physics. The standard model of particle physics is the theory that explains how the universe works at its most basic level. It's a way for scientists to keep track of all the different types of particles and how they interact with each other. And the Higgs boson is like the VIP at this particle party. It's a crucial part of the standard model. Not only does it help to confirm the standard model, but it also highlights the need for new theories and models to explain what the standard model can't. Without the Higgs boson, the standard model wouldn't make sense, and scientists would have to come up with a whole new theory to explain why particles have mass. But with this holy particle, everything fell into place and the standard model was complete. It was like solving a giant puzzle, or finding a glue that holds the universe together. Now, the discovery of the Higgs boson was a huge breakthrough for physics, but it also opened up new questions and possibilities for future research. So, what's next? Well, just like any good puzzle, there are always more pieces to find and more mysteries to uncover. Scientists in LHC continue their research and experiments with the Higgs boson. They're collecting data and analyzing it to better understand the properties of this particle. They're looking at how it interacts with other particles, how it decays, and even how it behaves in different conditions. Also, the standard model explains a lot of what we observe in the universe, but it still has some gaps. For example, right now, it can't explain things like dark matter and dark energy. So we've created another area of research, the potential new physics beyond the standard model of particle physics. This new area should include things like dark matter and gravity, and some scientists believe that the Higgs boson could become a crucial part of it. It could hold the key to understanding all these mysterious phenomena. To find out if that's really the case, scientists are currently searching for other particles that could be associated with the Higgs field, such as the Higgsinos. They would be a new type of particle that could help explain, for example, how dark matter works. And lastly, researchers are also looking at the Higgs boson's role in the early universe. We want to see how it may have played a part in the formation of galaxies, stars, and even life as we know it. It's like a time machine that helps us understand how the universe came to be. So, all in all, the discovery of the Higgs boson opened a door to a whole new world of possibilities, and scientists are having a blast exploring all the new questions and mysteries that come with it. It's like a treasure map, pointing us to new mysteries to uncover and new theories to explore. Hey, perhaps there is a boson after all.
There's this interesting ancient site near St. Louis, Missouri, that a lot of people don't know about. It's called Cahokia, and it used to be a huge city with up to 20,000 people living there back in the 11th century. It's full of these massive earthen mounds that were built by hand, and the biggest one is still there today, at the Cahokia Mound State Historic Site. Even though we don't know everything about this civilization, researchers have been able to piece together some information from the remains they've found. For starters, they found some pretty old teeth at this site. After studying their appearance and structure, scientists suggest that a lot of different indigenous groups lived there. About a third of them came from other areas in the middle of the continent, which they figured out by studying the different levels of various substances in the teeth. And get this, the way the mounds are arranged shows that this was actually a planned-out city, not just a bunch of villages grouped together. The rulers lived on top of the mounds, while everyone else lived in other structures. It's amazing to think that they were doing things like farming, hunting, logging, pottery, and weaving, all within this one giant city. Right in the middle of Cahokia, there was this giant mound that was about 100 feet tall, and around it, there was this huge wooden fence. Inside the fence was the city center, which had a big open space called a plaza. Archaeologists think that the plaza was designed to represent the 4 cardinal directions of the world. It was like the people who built it wanted to create a place that was in harmony with the universe. The center of the city was where they held ceremonies and events, and it was such a big deal that people from outside Cahokia would come to be a part of them too. What became of this city? Hard to tell. Some people think that the reason it fell apart is that they cut down too many trees and the land got all messed up. Other scientists believe that's not true, because the soil was still in pretty good shape after the city was gone. The Europeans were not even around at that time, so they couldn't have influenced the downfall of Cahokia either. There's also one theory that suggests there were fights with other communities that caused the city to collapse. These days, there are over 65 preserved mounds, and you can even climb the steps of the tallest one. The best part is that local authorities are thinking of making it a national park, so you should totally plan to visit before it gets too crowded. Mohenjo Daro is another lost ancient city that's still surrounded by mystery. Located in modern-day Pakistan, it was a city that flourished during the Bronze Age, and it was extremely advanced for its time. It had things like water systems and fancy architecture that other cities didn't have back then. Despite these features, it's not as well known as other ancient cities, like those in Egypt or Mesopotamia. What's even weirder is that at some point, the city was abandoned, and no one knows why. Archaeologists found the city in 1911, but it took a while for them to realize how important it was. Eventually, they uncovered a lot of really interesting things about the city, like its advanced sanitation system. Excavations uncovered over 700 wells, as well as private baths and a large communal bath. Remarkably, even private homes had toilets, and waste was efficiently disposed of through a citywide sewage system. They also had a lot of trade connections and made some really beautiful objects, like pottery, jewelry, and figurines that were sold all over the region. Despite its amazing culture and knowledge, scientists have yet to figure out why the city was abandoned. Some people think changes in the nearby river might have had something to do with it. The writings that the people of Mohenjo Daro left behind are still a complex code, even for the most skilled specialists, making it even harder to piece together their history. Have you heard of the lost city of Kolmanskop? It used to be a small settlement in the Namib Desert. Legend has it that it got its name from a man named Coleman who got stuck in the local dunes and was never seen again. But that's not the interesting part. In 1908, a railway worker found a shiny stone and showed it to the chief railway foreman, who turned out to be a hobby mineralogist. They discovered it was a diamond, and soon, Kolmanskop became the richest town in Africa and one of the richest places in the world. It had luxurious stone houses, a school, a hospital, and even an ice factory to produce ice for fridges. The hospital had the first X-ray machine in southern Africa, which was supposedly used to check if workers were illegally swallowing diamonds. Its popularity began to decline in the late 1920s when another diamond-rich location was discovered nearby. Most of the inhabitants soon began to flee the city in search of a better life, leaving the buildings abandoned. In 1938, all machinery was taken south and the town was left to the desert. The last inhabitant left Kolmanskop between 1956 and 1960. The hot climate and low humidity have preserved the structures over time, and tourists can now visit this desert ghost town. You've surely heard about this next ancient city, Machu Picchu. It's this incredible ancient location in Peru. It stretches across a huge piece of land in the Andes Mountains and sits high above sea level. It's even considered one of the wonders of the modern world. But here's the thing. Scientists aren't exactly sure what it was used for. It could have supported up to 750 people, but there aren't a lot of human clues left behind. Some people think it was more of a spiritual or ceremonial place, while others believe it may have been like a fancy spa retreat for the nobles. the extensive terraces might mean it was used for crop testing or as a trading hub. And there's even a theory that it was used as a prison because they found a cell-like area too. It's amazing that even today, archaeologists and historians are still puzzled about how it was built. Did you know that they probably didn't even use wheels for transportation? And those massive granite rocks were somehow pushed up the steep Andean mountains, even though most of them weighed a lot. Some historians think that hundreds of people worked together to push each rock up the peak. The huge stones at Machu Picchu are also so close together that you can't see any cracks between them. It's pretty cool because it also makes the area safe during earthquakes, which is important since Peru is a shaky country. But how did the stones stay put during all those quakes? They actually move a little bit, but then they go back to their original spot, almost like they're dancing. Some people think wet wooden wedges were used to keep them in place, but that doesn't really add up, considering how big the structures are. Locals back then also seem to have built Machu Picchu without using any pack animals or iron tools. They had to sculpt and put everything together using mostly their hands. Plus, the citadel is built on a fault, so they had to move a bunch of stone and earth to make it flat. Scientists also think that the real construction is actually underground because of the deep foundations and drainage system. In fact, there's a hidden water system that was just recently discovered using 3D scanning. They didn't even use mortar to put the granite blocks together. They were so precise that you can't even fit a sheet of paper between them. One theory suggests that people that lived there used stone tools made of a harder material than the stone they were cutting.
Remember the Neanderthals? Our superstar humanoid cousins of the Pleistocene era in all their wide-nosed and slope-foreheaded glory? They roamed through Europe and Asia for over 350,000 years before they vanished. This was around the same time our ancestors, the Homo sapiens, decided to take a vacation from Africa and explore the world. We may never know what truly happened to the Neanderthals and why they didn't make it to the present times, but thanks to some hefty archaeological digging and impressive fossil finds, we now know a bit more about them. One theory for their disappearance is that the climate wasn't suitable for them anymore. Supporters of this idea think Mother Nature turned on the Neanderthals and sent them packing. Unfortunately, if we look at Neanderthal archaeological sites in Italy, for example, there are no signs of weather catastrophes that could have wiped out this entire species. Others believe there was a bit of resource competition between Neanderthals and humans. That's why specialists also dug around several other archaeological sites where Neanderthals and sapiens might have rubbed elbows for about 3,000 years. In this case, it does seem that the Neanderthals were a bit behind with their tools. Their technology was like flip phones in the age of VR. But who knows if these two species ever crossed paths in that particular region? The evidence is still fuzzy. How they went extinct isn't the only information we're curious about when it comes to Neanderthals. Other scientists, for instance, are trying to decode some of the Neanderthal molecular barcodes to identify their specific traits, some of which you might share, believe it or not. Sure, Neanderthals as a whole species did, in fact, go extinct, but that's not to say remnants of their DNA can't be found in humans. Now, you know how things go when folks live near each other. Some genetic mixing was bound to happen. The evidence? A dash of Neanderthal DNA which was found in modern folks. Now, this is where the plot thickens. Scientists thought that since Neanderthals never lived in Africa, their DNA wouldn't be found in modern African populations. Well, it turns out that African people have about 0.5% Neanderthal DNA too. This doesn't mean our Neanderthal relatives simply teleported through African territories without leaving any trace behind. What this discovery actually implies is that early humans might have visited Europe, mixed their genetic material with that of Neanderthals, after which they returned to Africa. That's a lot of migration. How did we stumble upon that Neanderthal DNA these days, you might wonder? Well, scientists gathered thousands of people from all around the world. Participants came from places like East Asia, Europe, South Asia, America, and Africa. Percentages may vary, sure, but around 20% of the good old Neanderthal DNA is still found in US modern folks. Sure, the average Joe only carries about 2% of that caveman swagger. If you're from certain places or families that have a smidge more Neanderthal in their gene soup, you're looking at 3% tops. Is there anything in particular that we share with our long-gone humanoid cousins? As it turns out, our Neanderthal ancestors gifted us more than just their company for some thousands of years. They also passed down the incredible legacy of their noses. Well, you see, the Neanderthals were outfitted with some seriously high-rising sniffers. These weren't just cosmetic, they were also quite the asset in chilly climates. The icicle-dripping, teeth-chattering kind of cold where your breath could freeze before it leaves your lips. During those days, the Neanderthal noses worked as personal heaters, warming and humidifying the cold, dry air they inhaled. For that kind of extreme weather, these impressive nasal skyscrapers turned out to be quite handy. When our Homo sapiens ancestors decided to leave the sunny savannas of Africa for a spot of frostbite up in Eurasia, they bumped into the Neanderthals. This encounter resulted in not just an exchange of pleasantries, but also an exchange of genes that coded for larger noses. This newfound genetic nugget was discovered by scientists who dug deep into the DNA of over 6,000 volunteers. To complete the study, these scientists meticulously compared this genetic data to snapshots of the volunteers' faces. They measured the distances between various points on each face, such as the height of the volunteers' nose bridges. They then played a game of spot the genetic marker to identify if certain facial traits were linked with specific genes. By the end of this exciting chase, they hit the jackpot. 33 shiny new genome areas were linked to facial features. One standout gene, named ATF3, was traced back to our Neanderthal ancestors and seemed to be the maestro of controlling nose height. Participants with Native American ancestry had Neanderthal hand-me-downs in this gene, contributing to their taller noses. Think of the ATF3 gene as a Neanderthal housewarming gift to us humans, as we stepped into colder climates from Africa. Interestingly, this isn't the first time our ancestors have played pass the gene. Back in 2021, the same research team uncovered a gene influencing lip shape called TBX15. This gene was a little love note from the Denisovans, another set of our ancient relatives, who lived in Asia and went extinct around 30,000 years ago. Another part of the scientific community believes our Neanderthal buddies had this weird genetic feature when it came to their brains. Is that why they didn't make it? Through this theory, it was suggested that US humans might owe our brainy edge to a quirky gene mutation. This mutation gave our neocortex, that's the smarty pants part of the brain, a little population boom in the neuron department. This amazing gene of ours isn't all that different from the Neanderthal version. It's just one amino acid off, just like ordering a coffee with one sugar instead of none. This tiny tweak is found in virtually all modern humans. Meanwhile, our extinct relatives, the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other primate pals, all missed the mutation memo, at least according to the study. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just because we have more neurons doesn't necessarily mean we're geniuses by comparison. But these results do suggest that we might have rewired the brain in a way that gave us a cognitive leg up. Also, it's not all about this lone amino acid difference. It's just a piece of the puzzle. Scientists have previously found a whopping 96 differences between our DNA and that of Neanderthals that could have potentially affected our different outcomes as species. Studying Neanderthal DNA also gave us some insight into their relationships. In fact, we now have some solid evidence of what a Neanderthal family looked like. And surprisingly, it's not really that different from ours. For this study, researchers gathered information from a Neanderthal archaeological site located in Asia. They discovered that one particular family included a doting Neanderthal dad, his teen daughter, and a sprightly young lad who was possibly their nephew or cousin. Part of the group was also an older female relative, maybe an aunt or granny. Now, our young damsel would eventually pack her bags, wave a teary goodbye, and leave her papa's home when she found Mr. Right. Had she been a boy like her young cousin, she would have been a happy homebody. But worry not, she wasn't stepping into a world of strangers. Her new community likely had some familiar, friendly faces. But how were scientists able to predict the ending of this story? By browsing through their gene pool, researchers were able to figure out that the Neanderthal social structure was patrilical. What this means is that most female Neanderthals left their homes when choosing a partner and started a new life with another family. The same research shows that our cave-dwelling clans likely weren't living in isolation either. Families living close by were probably visiting the same rock sampling areas to make their stone tools, the equivalent of a neighborhood hardware store. And when they weren't tooling around, they were busy hunting delicious meals like ibex, horses, bison, and other wandering critters. Scientists, however, were careful to add that this ancient family portrait might not represent the full spectrum of Neanderthal social life. They've kindly asked future archaeologists to get more Neanderthal DNAs on the Ancestry websites.
See this place on the map? Yeah, right there. It's estimated that around 100 people have vanished or lost their lives here. Why, you ask? Well, it seems they were all looking for this guy, Percy Fawcett. He was a British colonel, famous for his sharp blue eyes, perfectly groomed beard, and signature hat. He looked like a character from Pride and Prejudice, but lived more like Indiana Jones. In fact, this character was inspired by Fawcett's story. But his disappearance in 1925 was more macabre than any movie plot. Colonel Fawcett was bold. Not the ask your neighbor's Wi-Fi password kind of bold. I'm talking full-on, I don't care that much about my life bold. He used to be a soldier in Sri Lanka and even did a secret spy gig in Morocco, but he needed more. So in 1906, Fawcett started exploring parts of Brazil and Bolivia where no one had dared to go before. His mission was to create secret, mind-blowing maps. Okay, that doesn't sound too risky, but trust me, it was. If you want to explore the world nowadays, you just open Google Earth and, well, that's it. No danger, no adrenaline, just maybe one or two creepy street view photos. Ew. But we're talking about the beginning of the 20th century, when satellites and this weird Google car didn't exist. Back then, if you wanted to fill in the world map, you actually had to explore the land on foot. So that's how Colonel Fawcett ended up in South America. And he became famous for his expeditions to map out the wild Amazon. He was the first guy to record the locations of waterfalls in that region, for example. But then he got obsessed. Blame it on lack of sleep or whatever sketchy Amazon jungle juice he was sipping, but suddenly he was like, I'll bet there's an ancient advanced city hidden somewhere around here. Spoiler alert, there wasn't. But he was hooked on that idea. Hanging out with native Indians for so long convinced him that large groups could totally thrive in the middle of a massive rainforest. And of course, Fawcett loved a good old adventure story, especially the ones from the 16th and 17th centuries, written by European explorers. In those stories, adventurers claimed they had found huge settlements and fine roadways deep in the heart of Latin America. But Fawcett's all-time favorite story came from a manuscript written in 1753. Back then, adventurers were hunting for precious metals in Brazil when they stumbled upon a ruined city with monumental buildings, roads, and plazas. Oh, and every corner had a Roman-style spire. Naturally, the colonel was all in to find it. Too bad no one told him this manuscript is mostly considered a forgery. Yep, this story is as real as Snow White's. But then, things got weird. The settlement described in that manuscript was supposedly located in the northeast side of Brazil. But now, he's saying there's an advanced civilization in Mato Grosso, which is in a different part of the country. So he decided to name this new place the City of Z. Back in the 1920s, the colonel launched 2 separate expeditions to find it, but both trips failed, as he faced terrible weather, fever, and of course, exhaustion. Now, tell me in the comments, what do you think Fawcett did after 2 failed expeditions? Option A, he quit. Option B, he called his mom. Option C, he tried again because he didn't get the memo that the universe is clearly saying stop. Well, of course, option C is the right answer. This is relentless Fawcett we're talking about. So, 3 years later, the colonel finally gathered enough cash to launch yet another expedition in search of the City of Z. All he needed was a crew of people crazy enough to join him. Famous and experienced explorers were begging to come along. But nope, Fawcett decided to take his son and his best buddy instead. In January 1925, this brave trio set off on their journey. They packed mosquito nets, canned food, and made a promise, "We shall return." Another spoiler alert, they didn't. Uh-oh. The journey kicked off in New Jersey, and then they sailed all the way to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. There, they stopped to grab some pack animals, like horses, and hired a couple of local guides. Now they were ready to head to the city of Cuiabá. Now keep in mind the distances in Brazil are crazy huge. So this little journey was like traveling from Miami to Chicago on foot. 3 months later, they finally ventured into the jungle for the first time. And that's when the fun really began. The crew faced piranha-infested rivers, an endless maze of thick trees, and the worst part, bugs. The constant annoying zzz of a gazillion mosquitoes wouldn't let them sleep, and Fawcett's best friend's foot got huge from tick bites. But the colonel didn't have time to babysit his friend's princess foot. Oh no, he was too obsessed to take a break. In fact, at some point, he was so far ahead of his companions that he had to camp alone for a night. On May 29th, Fawcett finally came to his senses. There was no City of Z. But did he let that stop him? Not really. He unpacked their gear and sent the local guides back to Cuiabá. But before saying a final goodbye, he asked them to deliver a letter to his wife, saying something like, "Don't worry, hon, our son is well and getting stronger every day." Sure he was. Anyway, after this dramatic farewell, the trio set off into the bush alone. The darkness swallowed the thick forest, and then they were never seen again. Okay, that was intense, so let's fast forward. 2 years later, the newspapers were still speculating whether the trio could still be alive, and Fawcett became a legend, like Bigfoot, but less hairy. One guy said that the colonel had become one of the locals and was living his happily ever after in the jungle. Another guy said he was held prisoner by the Indians, but no one could confirm any of these sightings. It wasn't until 1928 that the British authorities finally thought better late than never and decided to look for Fawcett and his crew. By that time, they were sure their expedition had perished, but they still needed proof. And after days and days of surviving the jungle's worst nightmares, they found, well, nothing. But in a weird way, this mystery inspired more explorers to look for them. It's estimated that about 100 people have passed away in this process, and a few have followed in the explorers' footsteps by disappearing without a trace. So, what really happened to the expedition? Researchers have pointed their fingers at everything under the sun: parasitic infections, starvation, drowning, jaguar attacks, you name it. Some even say Fawcett dove headfirst into mysticism and started an occult community in the jungle. The Brazilian anthropologist Orlando Vilas-Boas was probably the one who got the closest to solving this case. Back in the 1950s, he was working with the Calopalo Indians when they suddenly admitted to, getting rid of Fawcett. They even had bones to prove it. But it turns out a forensic analysis showed that the remains didn't belong to the colonel. So we're back to square one, and nobody knows, to this day, whatever the heck happened to them. Fawcett's quest, as we know it today, is based on some pretty questionable sources. But there is a possibility that he wasn't living in Delulu land after all. Recent discoveries suggest that his idea of a sophisticated jungle city wasn't just pure fantasy. In 2024, a massive ancient city was found in the Amazon, hidden beneath dense vegetation. Evidence suggests it was built around 2,500 years ago, and it was surprisingly advanced, featuring houses and plazas, all connected by an incredible network of roads and canals. But this city was in a forest in Ecuador, not Brazil. So who knows? Maybe the legendary city of Z is still out there. Ooh.
You're way more Neanderthal than you think, at least when it comes to your DNA. These ancient hominids were shorter and stockier than humans today. They made stone tools, used fire, wore clothing, and had some rituals of their own. The official theory says that they went extinct 40,000 years ago, but a new study says Neanderthals probably never really disappeared completely, but could have mixed with modern humans. It looks like every modern human has about 3% of the Neanderthal genome in their DNA. If it's accurate, it means Neanderthals were more connected with our ancestors than we previously thought and shared a long history of living together. Neanderthals were very close relatives of modern humans, but our families separated about 500,000 years ago. More than 10 years ago, scientists discovered that Neanderthals had families with the early humans who traveled out of Africa. Because of this, people living outside of Africa today have about 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA in their genes. We now have only 3 really good examples of complete genetic code from these ancient hominids. The first one comes from bones found in a cave in Croatia that are 50,000 to 65,000 years old. 2 more examples, which are about 80,000 and 50,000 years old, were found in caves in Eurasia. Scientists still aren't sure as much about how modern human DNA got into the Neanderthal genetic alphabet because they don't have enough material to study. But they did compare the existing DNA of 3 Neanderthals with the DNA of 2,000 modern humans. They found that the Neanderthal DNA might be made up to 3.7% of modern human genetic code. It means that in the ancient Neanderthal population, about 1 in 30 parents were modern humans. The scientists found that modern human DNA got mixed into the Neanderthal genetic alphabet during at least 2 periods when humans and Neanderthals were interbreeding. This happened once about 200,000 to 250,000 years ago, and again about 100,000 to 120,000 years ago. There might have been other times they mixed, but we can't see those in the DNA we have now. Another recent study, which hasn't been fully checked by other scientists yet, says that most of the Neanderthal DNA in modern humans came from one big period of mixing, about 47,000 years ago, that lasted for almost 7,000 years. Scientists found skulls that are about 100,000 years old in 2 caves in the Middle East. These skulls look like they belonged to early modern humans, but have some features like bigger eyebrows that might show they had Neanderthal DNA. This could be because of gene flow from Neanderthals, and it fits in the mixing time frame. The study also looked at the genetic differences in the 3 Neanderthal genomes and found out that Neanderthals had an even smaller population than scientists thought before. It could be another proof that Neanderthals didn't just go extinct, but became part of the modern human gene pool. Many groups of modern humans left Africa and mixed with Neanderthals so much that Neanderthals couldn't stay separate. In the future, scientists want to study how modern human DNA affected Neanderthals. This could help us understand if this mixing had good or bad effects on Neanderthals. Neanderthals aren't our only relatives from the past. There used to be at least 9 species of humans on our planet. One of them, Homo habilis, earned the nickname Handyman because stone tools were found with its remains. It lived in eastern and southern Africa. This early human had a slightly larger brain than its older relatives and an ape-like face. Homo habilis was about 4 feet tall and ate a variety of foods. For a long time, scientists thought Homo habilis was the oldest member of our human family. But new dating methods have shown that Homo erectus, another ancient human, might be older and not related to Homo habilis. Homo naledi is a more mysterious member of our human family discovered in a South African cave in 2013. It's the only region of the world where their remains were found. They walked on 2 feet but were also good at climbing trees. They were small, about 4 feet 9 inches tall, weighed around 88 pounds, and had small brains. We don't know much about how they lived since we haven't found stone tools or other cultural evidence. But some scientists think they might have buried their deceased and made cave art. In 2010, scientists found some fossils in a cave in Siberia, but they weren't sure what species they belonged to. These fossils are from a group called the Denisovans, who lived between 194,000 and 51,000 years ago. We don't know much about them because we only have a few fossils, but DNA analysis has shown that Denisovans were closely related to Neanderthals and modern humans. They even had families with early humans, especially in Southeast Asia. There aren't enough fossils to give Denisovans their own species name, but their genes are found in modern humans, which means they might be part of our own species. As scientists study more about Denisovans and fossils in Southeast Asia, we might understand better how different species fit into the Homo family tree. In 2003, they found fossils of a very small human-like species in a cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia. These tiny people lived between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago. They were only about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Scientists think they might have come from another species, Homo erectus, and became smaller over time because they lived on an island with limited food. Because of their small size, they're often nicknamed hobbits. Around 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, yep, that's us, were the last humans left out of many different kinds of human-like species that walked on 2 legs. So, the logical question is, what happened to the others? And what did we have to do with their disappearance? Some scientists think we survived because our offspring lived longer, or because we were better at handling changes in the weather. Others think we might have competed with other human species, or maybe mixed with them and shared genes. About 300,000 years ago, the first Homo sapiens lived in Africa. They didn't look exactly like us, but they were more similar to us than other early humans. They had tall, round skulls with almost straight foreheads. Unlike Neanderthals, they didn't have thick brows or jutting jaws like Homo naledi. They also had chins, which no other early humans had, though we still don't know why. Homo sapiens lived in bigger groups and had more genetic diversity compared to other early humans. This helped us in many ways, not just in staying healthy. Having big social networks across different places was like having a safety net. If we ran out of food or water, we could go to other groups we were connected to, and they would help us because we weren't strangers, we were family. These big networks also helped these early humans share new ideas and inventions. A big simulation showed that later species of humans could live in many different environments because of these wide networks and the ability to adapt. We know that Neanderthals were really smart, but Homo sapiens might have been just a little bit smarter. Small inventions like weaving and sewing needles could have given Homo sapiens an edge. Scientists have found evidence of weaving from 35,000 years ago and sewing needles from 30,000 years ago. Weaving lets you make things like baskets and nets to catch food. Sewing needles help you make better clothes and tents, which keep you and your youngsters warm and safe, which is very important for survival.
It was September 7, 1695, somewhere at sea near the Horn of Africa. A merchant ship laden with treasure was sailing from present-day Yemen to its home port in India. Its escort had previously been captured by pirates, and now it was their turn, as they spotted a frigate approaching them fast. From its mast pole, a red flag with a Jolly Roger on it fluttered in the wind. Once the battle was over, a British pirate named Henry Avery sailed away with one of the biggest catches ever. It all happened during the golden age of piracy, from 1690 to 1730. At that time, all ships sailing across the Atlantic Ocean feared the European pirates, and you could hear "Arr, matey" in taverns on several continents. From the coast of North America all the way to South America, they would engage merchant vessels and steal their cargo. The Caribbean was a real hotspot for piracy. Do the names Blackbeard and Captain Kidd sound familiar to you? Or is it just me who read too many pirate stories? Anyway, as the 17th century drew to a close, the thirst for wealth made some pirates sail down the eastern coast of Africa and into the Indian Ocean. This is how Avery ended up so far in the east, but he was not the only European to sail in that direction. At the time, the Indian Ocean was teeming with merchant ships, as convoys transported luxury goods or pilgrims from Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula to the Mughal Empire in what is today India. The rich cargo included silk, spices, incense, and perfumes. In addition to these goods, the East India Company transported everything from cash to jewels on behalf of several European empires, such as England, Netherlands, and France. Sounds pretty much like any pirate's dream, doesn't it? The most attractive targets were ships that belonged to the Mughal emperor, whose impressive realm covered nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. Back in the Caribbean, cloth, timber, and spirits were the most common types of cargo. It didn't seem good enough to the most ambitious pirates. They set their minds on more luxurious catch: gold, gems, and silver they could get in the Indian Ocean. Adam Baldridge, who was a wanted man in British-ruled Jamaica because he took a man's life, was among the first to arrive. Through not-so-honest means, in 1691 he managed to establish a safe haven for pirates on St. Mary's Island, near the remote northern coast of Madagascar, 250 miles off the African mainland. The place sat close to major shipping routes between Europe and Asia. Talk about an ideal location. The pirates made sure to fortify the island. As you can guess, they didn't like unexpected guests and enjoyed staying there, having fun in safety. A Frenchman, Olivier Levasseur, and his English colleague, John Taylor, were among the most successful of those islanders. In 1721, they easily captured a Portuguese treasure ship. It didn't go so smoothly, though. A serious storm damaged the ship, so they had to dock at the island of Reunion for repairs. There were important individuals aboard, such as the Viceroy of Portuguese India and the Bishop of Goa. But the loot was the pirate duo's biggest feat. Cash, diamonds, and porcelain worth hundreds of millions of US dollars in today's money. The catch was so enormous that the pirates didn't even bother to rob the rich passengers. But even this heist couldn't overshadow what Henry Ivory had achieved 26 years earlier. We don't know a lot about the life of this Englishman, except that he was born in Plymouth and that he served in the Merchant Marine. In 1694, Ivory became the first mate aboard Charles II, a privateering ship hired by the Spanish crown. Such ships were privately owned and engaged by nations during major conflicts with other nations. Ivory's ship had an important mission of tracking French smugglers in the Caribbean, but soon the tables would turn. Ivory was good with words and led a successful mutiny in 1694. After he left the unfortunate captain ashore and renamed the ship Fancy, the new captain set sail for Madagascar. There, news reached Ivory that a large fleet of 25 ships was soon to leave for its home in India. Apart from pilgrims, the fleet included several treasure ships owned by the Grand Mughal of India himself. Ivory didn't waste time and assembled an armada of 6 ships to go after the Mughal convoy. As soon as they spotted the fleet, the pirates started a chase. They managed to board an escort vessel, stealing gold and silver worth more than $17 million in today's money. And if that wasn't enough, Ivory and his men went after the flagship named Ganjai Savai. It was the biggest ship in all of India at the time that could protect itself better than the whole fleet combined. The pirates got lucky, as one of their volleys cut the main mast of the Indian ship in half, and there was more serious damage to it. Ivory brought his ship alongside the crippled Mughal ship, and his men boarded the vessel. Indian sailors showed some impressive resistance, even though their captain had abandoned them. Ivory's men won in the end, and they got one of the richest pirate catches ever. They filled their chests with hundreds of thousands of pounds in jewels, gold, and silver. After it, the pirates set course for the Bahamas and used their enormous wealth to convince the local ruler to let them come ashore. Their most prized possession, their ship, the Fancy, was included in that deal. Once the news of the heist reached the Emperor of India, a huge diplomatic scandal broke out. The Grand Mogul was enraged and accused the East India Company of plotting against him, arresting several of their high-ranking officials. The company feared that the Indian leader would cancel their valuable trade agreements, so they decided to do something nice for him and bring to justice the pirates responsible for the theft. Together with British ships equipped for search at sea, they launched one of the first truly international pursuit of Ivory and his shipmates, promising a reward to whoever captured him. The pursuit was only partially successful, as they only managed to catch and trial several pirates. Most of them scattered across Europe and the Americas, keeping their share of the wealth. Ivory earned himself the nickname the King of Pirates because of his adventure in the Indian Ocean. Historians believe he escaped to Ireland with his share of the loot using a false name, George Washington. No, I made that up. Piracy was a risky trade, and not all European fortune seekers were successful in the East. Take Dutch pirate Dirk Schijvers, who entrapped 4 ships in the Indian port of Calicut. He demanded money from the local Indian authorities and the East India Company, but they offered him only half of the requested sum. Finally, they settled on a different amount. When it didn't arrive, Schijvers set another ship ablaze. By this point, both the British and the Indians had had enough, and they hired 10 Indian pirate ships to drive Schijvers away, which they succeeded in doing. The pirate captain was forced to return for repairs to St. Mary's Island empty-handed. Oh well. The end of the 18th century and an increased European presence in the region brought about the end of the golden age of piracy. As the British authorities increased raids on pirate strongholds, the number of pirates decreased significantly. In 1692, a huge earthquake that was followed by a tsunami erased a well-known pirate haven from the map, Port Royal in Jamaica. But piracy in the Indian Ocean never fully disappeared. Modern pirates might not have an eye patch or a parrot on their shoulder, but they mean business just as the pirates from the past. The Strait of Malacca connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, and today, around 40% of world trade takes place through it. Despite this fact, piracy was alive and well here even in the 21st century. The national authorities of Malaysia and Indonesia, 2 countries the strait separates, were finally able to curb piracy only in 2016. No, it's not a romantic story at all.
54,000 years ago, there was one interesting group that lived in caves. A father, daughter, and a couple of other members who were their close relatives. And the cool thing here is that they were the first Neanderthal family we know about. A team of scientists studied ancient DNA from their teeth and bones to learn more about early human society. And this research showed a cool thing. They probably lived in these caves at the same time, together. There were 11 Neanderthals that lived together in one cave, and 2 others from another cave that was somewhere close in the neighborhood. So there were 13 of them, 8 grown-ups and 5 kids. Together with their DNA, scientists also found their stone tools and animal bones. Neanderthals are the ancient human relatives that are definitely the closest ones to us. Their skull was long and flattened if you compare it to the skull of Homo sapiens that's more globular. They also had this specific prominent brow ridge above the eyes. You can easily recognize them by their face too, with the central part of the face protruding forward. Plus, they had a large, broad nose. Some believe their nose was a way of adapting to living in cold, dry environments. When the inside of the nose is bigger, it moistens and warms the air you breathe better. Unlike us, they didn't have much of a chin. Also, scratch marks on their front teeth tell us Neanderthals used them like a third hand when they would prepare food and work with materials they used. Their bodies were strong and muscular, with wide shoulders and hips. Their average height was 5 to 5.7 feet, with a weight of 140 to 180 pounds. Their stocky appearance with short lower arm and lower leg bones minimized their skin surface, better protecting them from the cold. Their lifespan was about 30 years, even though some of them lived longer than that. Neanderthals would dwell in regions that are now Europe and Asia for over 350,000 years. They disappeared somewhere around 40,000 years ago. That's about the time we could find traces of Homo sapiens in Europe. Their families were close-knit groups of 10 to 20. That's a lot less than the population of any ancient or modern human community. It's more like the size of groups of endangered species that are close to going extinct. These Neanderthals lived in their caves with small communities, but they didn't live isolated from the rest of their kind. They relied on each other for survival. They took care of one another, especially those who couldn't care for themselves. Also, their caves aren't as primitive as we might imagine. For example, they had a hole close to hearths and they would probably use it to heat water. Also, They would organize their space. They had sleeping areas, parts of the cave where they could leave trash, and areas where they could make stone tools and prepare their food. They would travel through the river valleys to catch their prey, such as bison, ibex, horses, and other animals. They were skilled in planning their strategies. Some studies showed they were aware of reindeer migration patterns, so they would plan their actions according to their predictions of where their prey could move. One of the biggest animals they would go after was the woolly mammoth. You know them, a relative of modern elephants covered in fur with a weight of up to 12,000 pounds that went extinct a long time ago. And studies showed woolly mammoths and Neanderthals shared some genetic traits. It's not that surprising when you think about it. Both species developed from African ancestors before they managed to adapt to the cold, harsh climates of Eurasia during the Ice Age. So they faced similar conditions and both went extinct at about the same time. Neanderthals also used stone to make tools, similar to ones other early humans used, such as scrapers and blades made from stone flakes. These tools scientists found in both of the caves they studied are created using the same raw materials. That means the communities probably hung out and interacted with each other in some way. Until the 20th century, many thought that Neanderthals were very different from modern humans, considering their genetics, physical appearance, and behavior. But more recent discoveries about this well-preserved Eurasian fossil population have shown that some of the people in it were the same as people alive today. Neanderthals lived before and during the last ice age, in some of the harshest places that humans have ever lived. Besides their tools and catching animals, they also gathered plants from around their area. They would also eat cooked vegetables relatively often. Their ability to stay alive for tens of thousands of years during the last ice age is a good example of how humans can adapt to almost any situation. Neanderthals made the earliest cave art that we know about. Scientists explored 3 Spanish caves where they lived, and all of them had black and red paintings of dots, animals, and geometric symbols, together with handprints, hand stencils, and engravings. These paintings were made more than 60,000 years ago. Since Homo sapiens came to Europe 20,000 years after that, we can assume Neanderthals were the only human species on the continent at the time, so they must have been the ones who created this art. Also, these caves were 435 miles apart, so it wasn't like only some of the Neanderthals knew about it. Paintings were obviously their long-lived tradition. They were also big fans of fashion. They made their own jewelry, some of it out of eagle talons. The oldest examples we could find are nearly 130,000 years old. They also most likely used pigment to camouflage or decorate their bodies. Also, Homo sapiens weren't the only species that used fires. Researchers looked at more than 140 fireplace sites across Europe and realized Neanderthals used fire there for a long time too. These signs included charcoal, burned bones, and heated stone artifacts. Neanderthals used fire for cooking food and making tools. They would stick wooden shafts into pieces of stone with pitch, which would be like natural glue. Since burning the bark of birch trees is the only way to make this sticky liquid, the Neanderthals must have been able to control fire. Most people imagine Neanderthals probably grunted, but that's not true in reality. They didn't quite sound like us either. Their big chest, posture, and the shape of their throats probably resulted in a voice that was louder and higher pitched than the average human's voice. They probably didn't have sophisticated vocabularies as we do, but they could use complex speech because they had the hyoid bone. It's this little thing we have in our neck too, the one that supports the root of our tongue. It's the same feature that allows us to vocalize as we do. They were more similar to us than we might expect. Some believe Neanderthals even built boats so they could sail across the Mediterranean. And it's not like Neanderthals lived somewhere, went extinct, and then modern humans showed up. It seems these groups did meet around 100,000 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula or in the Middle East. That's when the first groups of modern humans were moving from Africa. Scientists analyzed the DNA of one of the Neanderthal women that lived more than 50,000 years ago, and it includes genetics from modern humans too. Some traits we have, like skin and hair color, mood, and sleeping patterns, are connected to the amount of sunlight we get. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia for a long time before modern humans arrived there, so they were used to less sunlight compared to the ones who came from Africa. Neanderthals had different traits because of their exposure to less sunlight, and these traits were passed on to their offspring when they had children with modern humans. In other words, some of the traits that modern humans have today are influenced by Neanderthal genes. For example, people who are night owls often have Neanderthal genes. Also, around 1% of Neanderthals had light skin, red hair, and perhaps even freckles.
Imagine standing in the middle of Europe 40,000 years ago. The landscape is rough, cold, and unforgiving. Fast food is scarce, and there's no internet. Suddenly, from out of the woods steps a figure, stocky, strong, and with a face that is quite unusual. This human looks similar to us, but something about them is different. Their brow is heavy, their nose is broad, and their body seems to be built to fight nature itself. Well, congrats! You've just met a Neanderthal. You might have thought that Neanderthals were basically ancient humans, but that's not really true. We come from the same genus called Homo, but we, all modern humans, belong to one same species called Homo sapiens. However, there used to be lots of human species before, and Homo neanderthalensis was just one of them. And they actually were kind of cooler than us. So what in the world has happened to them? Neanderthals lived for a long time, for about 360,000 years, across Europe and parts of Asia. 40,000 years ago, the place we now call southern Italy was sitting on top of a huge disaster, a massive supervolcano called Campi Flegrei. This big boy is huge, about 9 miles wide. That's about 10 to 20 minutes in a car to get across it all. But there were no cars then, remember? At the time, it was quiet for a while, but one day, suddenly, it blew in what became one of the biggest volcanic eruptions Europe had seen in 200,000 years. The catastrophe was so crazy that ash, gases, and debris altered the climate across the entire continent. What comes next is usually called a volcanic winter. Average temperatures drop, the sky gets darker, and life becomes even harsher than it already is. The eruption, known as the Campanian Ingembrite, caused Europe to cool by as much as 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't sound like much? Well, the drop of even 1 degree would cause winters to become harsher, causing horrible snowfall, rains, and floods. Crops would struggle to grow, leading to food shortages. The weather would go wild, too, with storms and droughts. Hey, kind of like now. Except multiply this by 7. Events like these caused some huge chaos in modern times. You can imagine what it did to the Neanderthals. But in reality, a simple volcanic eruption shouldn't destroy an entire species, right? Well, yes. The truth is, the Neanderthals were already hanging by a thread back then, and all because of us. They've been in a tough spot for a while. They lived in places that are now parts of Europe, Western Asia, and the Middle East. Modern humans, us Homo sapiens, entered Europe and were giving them some serious competition for food and shelter. Homo sapiens were sneaky dudes, better at finding food, easily adapting to different environments, and using more advanced tools. We were pushing Neanderthals out, trying to get the same resources. We literally made their extinction a slow and very unpleasant process. So, while the volcano definitely made things worse, it wasn't their only problem, and they didn't completely disappear after the eruption. Some of them hung on in isolated places, like Gibraltar, for another 12,000 years. That's because it's likely most of the severe cooling actually happened farther east, away from where the Neanderthals were trying to survive, and it didn't hit their homes as hard as we thought. In fact, the eruption may have even helped them, at least for a while. Some scientists say that the volcanic fallout might have slowed down modern humans' expansion into Neanderthal territory and gave the poor fellas a little more time to survive. So, the Campi Flegrei eruption was a nasty event, but it only delayed the inevitable. Campi Flegrei is a wild card. It's also known as the Fields of Fire. The air itself there is thick with legend. The Greeks and Romans believed this volcano was the gateway to the underworld. Even an ancient Roman poet, Virgil, mentioned this in his famous story, the Aeneid. The hero Aeneas must descend into the underworld, and this place is exactly where he starts. Back in the day, this landscape was full of Roman villas, spas, and fish ponds. The elite had the time of their lives there. What they didn't know, though, was that they were standing on treacherous ground that could go crazy at any moment. The Campi Flegrei is not your typical volcano. You'd imagine a single towering peak, but the landscape looks deceivingly calm, with small features popping up here and there. But if you flew above it, the sight would be insane. A gigantic circular basin, peppered with volcanic cones and craters, like scars from the Earth's violent past. The danger here lies in its subtlety. The ground beneath your feet is constantly shifting, even when you don't notice it. Every so often, the land rises, only to sink again, sometimes by several feet, as magma or gas moves beneath the surface. It's incredibly creepy. The risk is almost invisible. The Campi Flegrei is a massive depression formed by two colossal volcanic eruptions. One of them was the one that cooked Neanderthals, and another happened 15,000 years ago. The most famous eruption, though, happened in the 16th century, and it was horrifying. The year was 1538. For years, the people of Paswali had noticed something unsettling. Land that once sat below the waves was slowly rising. What was once the sea had become new ground. Rumblings from deep within the earth were terrifying, but had become a normal part of life. Earthquakes started in the early 1530s, small at first, but in just 8 years, they became the norm. Until one day, on September 28th, horrifying tremors shook the ground. By the next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a massive crack ripped open the earth near the ancient Roman town of Tripergoli. From this gash spewed fire, smoke, and a rain of volcanic ash miles away. It was thick and muddy, likely mixed with underground water. The ground trembled as hot pumice rock was thrown high into the air. And then a new mountain began to rise from the land. This was the birth of what we now call Monte Nuovo. Eventually, things seemed to calm down, as if the earth was catching its breath. For days, things seemed quiet. Locals relaxed a bit. They began to approach the new mysterious volcano, a crater with something that resembled boiling within it. People visited it like a new attraction. But then, just days later, the disaster struck again. At night, without warning, a new mountain went wild. A blast from the southern flank hurled scoria, chunks of jagged volcanic rock, into the air. This one was fatal for 24 people. The debris found afterwards was huge and coarse. For centuries after, the only signs of life from the Monte Nuovo were small fumaroles, jets of gas seeping from the earth. But then, even those faded away. Now it's just a lush green cone, a pretty sleeping giant. But the ground near Naples, Italy, is still alive. The Campi Flegrei sits quietly for now, but it might not be for long. It's showing signs it might be waking up again. This supervolcano looks like a hellish landscape, with its boiling mud pits, geysers, and steam vents. Romans and medieval Christians once believed it was a gateway to the underworld, and who can blame them? What's spooky is that recently scientists detected unusual activity under the surface. In 2012, Italian authorities raised the alert level on the volcano from green to yellow, meaning that it needs close monitoring. There are certain changes that usually happen before an eruption. The magma below starts releasing gases, which could weaken the rock above, eventually triggering a disaster. Unfortunately, no one can predict exactly when or if it will erupt. But if it does, the consequences could range from a minor inconvenience for locals to a global catastrophe. Its last tiny eruption happened in the 16th century, and it wasn't too bad. But if history repeats itself, like it was with Neanderthals, we're all cooked. An eruption like that could lead to global cooling, crop failures, and widespread famine. Right now, a group of scientists is trying to get a clearer picture of what's happening beneath the surface. The Campi Flegrei Deep Drilling Project is working to drill a 10,000-foot borehole, hoping to check out the magma chamber up close. But at least for now, the supervolcano remains quiet, and let's hope it stays that way. So, how would you feel if you accidentally met your relative who lived around 9,000 years ago? It's exactly what happened to Adrian Targett, a retired history teacher from Somerset, England. He noticed a familiar face on the front page of several newspapers. It was the image of the so-called Cheddar Man. Sounds cheesy, right? Anyway, his skeleton was discovered in 1903 in Cheddar Gorge near Somerset. Now that makes sense. Scientists used his DNA as a model to create a portrait of one of the oldest humans found in Britain who lived back in the Mesolithic period. Cheddar Man's initial DNA analysis has shown that he was a typical representative of the Western European hunter-gatherer society. Years later, with the use of new technology, the scientists managed to establish that he had dark brown or black hair, dark skin, and bright blue eyes. In 1997, researchers analyzed genetic material taken from the cavity of one of Cheddar Man's molar teeth and compared it to samples taken from locals whose families were known to have lived in the Cheddar area for centuries. The test found that Mr. Targett was, indeed, Cheddar Man's direct descendant. The genes were passed from mother to daughter across 300 generations. The only obvious difference in appearance between the two was skin coloring. As humans migrated north from the harsh African sun many thousands of years ago, their skin got lighter to absorb more sunlight and vitamin D. But this process didn't happen overnight. So the skin of Cheddar Man is much darker than that of his offspring, who was born under the cold British sun. Mr. Targett admitted that he didn't know how he felt about the test results. He wasn't surprised, though, as he recognized his nose shape and bright blue eyes in his ancestor's face. His name ended up in the Guinness World Record books as the farthest traced descendant by DNA. Studying Cheddar Man also opened up some new evidence of when and how farming came to the British Isles. Researchers concluded that the hero of the day was a part of an extended group of families of around 30 people. It looks like they came after the woolly mammoth had disappeared, but before farming became a thing in the area. The oldest traceable family tree before Mr. Targett's case stretched back 5,200 years, which is older than Rome. The lineage of the Chinese Kang clan spans over 80 generations. It includes more than 2 million people, and one of them is the famous philosopher Confucius himself. And it still holds the title of the most accurate longest family tree. Ever wondered how many ancestors you have? Well, let's do some math here. So first, it's 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. Yeah, if we keep multiplying by 2 and go back 10 generations, we get 1,204 ancestors. It sounds like quite a crowd, but 10 generations aren't that many when it comes to thousands of years of human history. About 20 generations, or 400 years ago, each of us should have about 1 million ancestors, and 800 years ago, 1 trillion ancestors. In theory, it leaves us with hundreds of trillions of people, which is practically impossible since there have never been that many people on Earth. Imagine there lived a guy around 1,000 years ago. His daughter was your mother's 33rd great-grandmother, and his son was your father's 33rd great-grandfather. It would mean he's on 2 branches of your family tree, both on your mother's and on your father's side. Most people who lived at that time would actually appear on our family trees not just twice, but thousands of times. There were just around 200 million people on Earth back then. It means that each of them would have to appear 5,000 times on the family tree of each of us living today. Life isn't that mathematically even, though. Some people from the past never had children, and others had many of them, which means they'd be featured on the trees of many, many people. Steve Olson, author of the book Mapping Human History, used the help of a statistician, a computer scientist, and a supercomputer to calculate how interconnected the human family tree is. If you went back in time 2,000 to 5,000 years, you'd meet a human who could call everyone currently living their descendant. A journey a bit further in time, say 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, would let everyone living today meet their ancestors, and that would be the same people. This supports the theory that our family trees aren't inverted pyramids that keep endlessly widening, but diamonds. You start from yourself, and as you go back several generations, you see it grow wider. Then, at some point, the tree starts narrowing as it goes down to only a few ancestors and even to one person. This person probably lived a few thousand years ago, during the reign of Tutankhamun, or maybe during the golden age of ancient Greece. They didn't do anything particularly outstanding, and they never knew they would be the ancestor of nearly 8 billion people living on our planet today. So, the next time you visit an exhibition of ancient Egyptian art from the times when pyramids were built, remember that every hieroglyph and every piece of jewelry there was created by one of your great-great-great multiplied by hundreds grandparents. And that mummy in the center of the hall most likely is your ancestor as well. On average, most of us can trace our ancestry with high accuracy back to the 1600s. If you decide to build your family tree, you've got to do some research and learn as much about your ancestors as you can. Start at home and study all papers and photos you can find in the attic or basement. Letters, especially the ones with dates on them, diplomas, report cards, diaries, and postcards are all going to be your best friends in the search. You can also check out the local library or archives. They should have census records that can help you. The results of your search will depend on your ancestors' social status and past wealth. It's always easier to find data on someone wealthy and important to their community. Now, in some cases, birth records might be destroyed or misplaced. Your origins can also affect the search, as many cultures had oral histories and didn't record anything in writing. In Western Europe, they started keeping genealogical records during the 1500s. Before that, family members memorized their whole lineage, and of course, they mostly remembered only the names. Sometimes they'd also remember major events alongside key ancestors. In some cases, in ancient times, genealogy helped find the lawful heir to the throne. Royals and nobles who were candidates for the position would present their genealogical trees, just like you send your CV and recommendation letter now. The U.S. didn't start keeping lineage records until around 1910. Switzerland has records that stretch back over 700 years. China, for comparison, has been doing it for over 2,000 years. Another priceless source of knowledge is your elderly relatives. Each artifact you find and show them will most likely encourage a long and interesting story full of names and details. There are many free websites that will help you organize the information you find. The more users the website has, the more likely you are to find some of your ancestors in someone else's tree. You can also use your findings, especially stories you managed to recover, to write your family history book. Be prepared that this research might take many years. The more ancestors you find, the more you'll still have to discover. In case you prefer biology to paperwork, you can try taking a DNA ancestry test. Scientists will analyze your genetic material to trace the migration paths of your ancient ancestors from 1,000 years ago, and will give you some information on your ancestral roots. You won't learn much about who your relatives were, though. Current tests can't go back further than 8 generations. There are many testing services available, and if you choose the ones with a large database, you have more chances of getting a match with other people looking for ancestors. Happy hunting!
Here's an ordinary fish. And here's a fish that was supposed to become a human, but it didn't. And not because it didn't come out of the ocean. The second fish has more intelligent eyes, but there's almost no difference between them. And that's why... Oh, and do you see that silhouette in the shadow? This big ugly monster is one of the key characters in this story, and it hates the intelligent fish. But I'll tell you more about that later. So, the ocean world is an eternal struggle for survival. The big and strong eat those who are smaller and weaker. 400 million years ago, it was the same, only on an even larger scale. Real monsters inhabited the ocean. Giant reptilian fish ate long sea centipedes. Some fish were covered with bony shells. Others had razor-sharp teeth. As a result, Some weaker fish escaped the ocean to survive. Other creatures left it to get food, or out of curiosity. And so, according to the theory of evolution, in the next millions of years, these fish began to grow limbs and hair and climb trees. And you know what happened next. And now, let's imagine that nothing forced fish to go to dry land. What if the ocean wasn't so dangerous, and there were a lot of algae and phytoplankton, and fewer ancient and giant sharks? There's food and there are no enemies. Why would fish need to leave this place and spend a couple 100 million years growing limbs? Fish could chill and hang out in the water. Some reached the surface, but they didn't like it there. Strong winds, lightning flashes, it all looked unfriendly. Millions of years passed, and fish were still around. More dangerous sea inhabitants appeared, but fish just grew longer fins to swim faster. Other fish grew plates on their tails to fend off enemies. But in general, most fish still look the same as they did millions of years ago. Their brains were developing. They learned how to communicate with one another using echolocation and movements of tails and fins. All day long, fish swam, looked for food, multiplied, and hung out together. It made no sense for them to evolve. And now, let's take a look at the history of humans. So, fish came to land and grew limbs. Then the struggle for survival began. Some creatures became carnivores. Others turned into herbivores. Some ate grass, and others noticed ripe fruit on trees. These crawling creatures started reaching for fruit. After millions of years of such attempts, the creatures' limbs began to grow longer. They stood on their back legs and finally became upright. These ancient animals, the ancestors of primates, learned to climb trees to get more fruit. Then some of them started using stones to crack nutshells. Others began to throw sticks into branches to knock down ancient apples. The more these animals interacted with the environment, the more their brains developed. In addition to saber-toothed tigers and other ancient monsters that tried to eat primates, there were also bad weather conditions that caused a lot of problems. Ancient apes began to hide in caves and even create shelters from branches and leaves. Then someone accidentally started a fire, and it changed the rules of the game. New neuron connections opened up in the brain, and it led to abstract thinking. People built bonfires in caves and watched flames cast shadows on the walls. Images began to form in their heads. The ancestors of people began to make drawings. And so, step by step, over millions of years, they evolved into Homo sapiens. Of course, no one knows precisely how it was, but let's assume that evolution worked this way. The struggle for survival formed the human brain. And now, let's go back to the ocean, where fish swim. They can move from side to side, up and down, and they don't need to reach any branches and fruit. Food is floating everywhere around them. Fish are cold-blooded, so they don't freeze. They don't need to hide from the rain or anything else, so they don't need to build roofs and shelters and start a fire. But still, something changes in their minds. Fish often swim to the surface to see this bright light from the sun. Through the clear water, they see the starry sky and the bright moon. And of course, these pictures form new neural connections in their brains. Fish are curious, and they think about how to explore the land. Their gill-based respiratory system doesn't allow them to be out of the water for a long time. Fish begin to contemplate this world. Over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, they learn to communicate with one another and begin to understand how the cycle of life in the ocean works. Some fish form large colonies and build houses inside coral reefs. But these houses look like big anthills, not like buildings. Fish stay there to hide from enemies and to have rest. Also, fish meet other enemies, birds. Gulls and pelicans catch lunch when fish rise close to the surface. Small fish decide never to swim there and create a law forbidding them from approaching the surface. The appearance of this unspoken statute forms society. Some fish train to fend off seagulls. fish hold sharp stones, pieces of coral, or shells in their teeth. And when gulls catch them, these fish hit the bird's feet with corals. Also, fish manage to catch their winged enemies. When some seagull dives under the water, fish attack it from all sides. They do this to study the seagull's body and understand how it can fly and breathe on the surface. Fish become wise creatures, like highly developed dolphins. They understand more and more about the planet, but don't strive to get out of the water because there's no need for it. But then, they discover something creepy. Fish swim toward the shore and see how big bald creatures without scales, with smooth skin, arms, and legs, dive into the water. Fish swim closer to get to know them, but these creatures catch them with their webbed hands. Now fish have another, more dangerous enemy, the sea people. They are intelligent, cruel, and strong. To understand these creatures, let's go back to the real world and look at seals, dolphins, whales, and walruses. All these animals are mammals, which means warm blood flows in them. But why are they so different from fish? Seals and sea lions have the same ancestor as dogs. Manatees and elephants have common origins. Whales and dolphins are marine versions of hippos and hoofed animals. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the ancestors of all these mammals were cold-blooded fish. They got out of the ocean and began to explore the land. Their bodies started to change, and their blood temperature rose. But some of these animals decided not to go far from the water. Those that left the ocean became dogs, bears, and elephants. And those who stayed close to the oceans and seas became mammals adapted to the water. They didn't explore the land for various reasons. Some animals hid in the water from land enemies. Perhaps some couldn't spend a long time under the scorching sun. They transformed into animals with fins. They don't have gills, but can hold their breath underwater for a few minutes. And now, imagine if primates living in trees moved to the shore. Their skin would lose its fur, webbing would grow on their fingers, and their whole body would get covered with a thick layer of fat. They would develop intelligence and become sea people. Each of them would weigh as much as a polar bear because of subcutaneous fat. The fact is that all marine mammals need a lot of fat to protect their body from the cold. A large amount of fat makes them mobile and fast in the water. Now, intelligent, peaceful fish have to fight with cruel sea people. But who will win in this conflict? I think we need another video to find out.
Parietal eye, or third eye. One of the features we lost almost 250 million years ago. If you take a closer look at animals like frogs or lizards, there's a random dot somewhere between their eyes. It's not just a random dot, but an actual organ. Scientists claim it's some kind of sensor that detects daylight. Not just that, it produces melatonin, a special hormone that regulates our biological cycles such as body temperature, reproduction, and sleep. They noticed this eye gradually became smaller over time, which means evolution realized it's a feature animals don't actually need. Maybe it happened because cells in our normal eyes became efficient enough, so we didn't need one more eye to sense or when we should sleep. Also, more and more animals were becoming warm-blooded with time, which means they were able to regulate their body temperature better. We have part of the organ even today, but in the form of the pineal gland in our brains, still in charge for melatonin. Either way, bye-bye third eye. There's a gene called GULA. With it, our ancestors could produce their own vitamin C. Not in a way they could set up a stand and sell it, but enough for the body to use it. Around 60 million years ago, the gene kinda stopped working. Not randomly. Our ancestors probably started getting enough of the vitamin C with the fruit they ate. Some of our very, very distant primate cousins that took a whole new direction in a family tree, such as lemurs, can still produce their own vitamin C. At some point, evolution decided they needed it, while we didn't. It's not just us. Our side of the primate family tree also doesn't need it anymore. Monkeys, apes, tarsiers, bye-bye gulab too. We have lemons and oranges now. Our body would lose lots of energy if it had to deal with all those traits our ancestors used to have. So it kind of deactivates those we don't need anymore, let's say electroreception. It's the ability many amphibians and fish have. For example, the electric eel uses this feature to detect prey when water is murky, communicate, or as a navigation system. Humans and our land cousins lost this feature because electric current can't flow through the air that easily. Then, there's this thing called Jacobson's organ. It's found inside the nose and has a purpose to sense pheromones and odors. A snake flicks its tongue, cats and horses make those weird faces. They all use Jacobson's organ. We also have it, but it doesn't quite seem to work. It doesn't send or receive signals from our brain, and scientists think we lost the ability to use it over 20 million years ago. As human habits and the way of life changed over time, we needed bigger brains. Scientists have skull remains of our ancestors from different periods, so they've realized our brain got way bigger over the last 3 million years. We needed to think of ways to deal with climate changes, big predators chasing us, finding some new, nice food. Yup, the brain grew for a reason. Food had a huge impact on our evolution. For instance, animals that only eat meat lost their sweet taste receptors because, well, they gave up on dessert, so didn't need those kinds of genes. Humans are omnivores, so we've always had a well-rounded set of receptors that could recognize tastes pretty good. These taste receptors came in handy because they could tell our ancestors which foods were good for them and which ones were toxic. Some bitter taste receptors stopped working through time, since humans have changed their eating habits. For instance, we learned to use fire for cooking, so many plants were less toxic for our bodies. We became sophisticated when it came to preparing food, and also learned how to share information we discovered by communicating and using language, like in cookbooks. We didn't need all the taste receptors anymore, so our body decided to shut them down and leave those that would come in handy in the future of our species. Whew! Luckily, we didn't lose our sense for nice chocolate. Our jaws have also changed. Our ancestral relatives had way bigger jaws, but since we started eating softer and cooked foods as well as using our brains more, the structure of our head needed some changes. Teeth became smaller too, plus we lost some. Many people never developed third molars, we also call wisdom teeth. They grew between the ages of 18 and 25. We can do without them, but for our ancestors, they were pretty much vital. By this age, their teeth had already become worn out, so third molars were possibly a replacement they needed. We may wonder why exactly we have body and head hair, but scientists wonder why we don't have more of it. Hair on our scalps is long, a bit shorter in some areas, and we don't have hair on the undersides of the wrists, palms, and the soles of our feet. One of the popular theories about human ancestors says that when moving from cool, shady forests to the hot, dry savanna, they got a new way of regulating their body temperature. They lost the fur along the way, which made it easier for them to catch their prey without overheating. Later, they discovered clothes and fire, which could keep them cozy during the cold times. Of course, there are more reasons for losing fur. Some say without fur, there's less chance of face lice or other parasites. Other researchers think that during dry seasons, humans would try to catch prey near lakes and shallow waters. Hair is not such a good insulator in water, so humans lost fur and instead got a layer of fat. Now, 85% of people can't wiggle their ears. There's a muscle that surrounds our outer ear, and scientists believe it used to allow our primate ancestors to move their ears in whichever direction they wanted. That helped them determine where the sound was coming from. After they started living in groups, they didn't have to completely rely on themselves, so they lost that feature. Apes can use their feet as well as they can use their hands, thanks to the plantaris muscle in their feet. With that muscle, animals can grip and do anything they want with objects they're holding. We also have this muscle, but it's underdeveloped and rather useless. 9% of humans are even born without it now. Hiccups are also one of the evolutionary leftovers humans may have gotten from their water-dwelling ancestors. Fish push water through gills, while amphibians gulp air. That's something mammals don't have wired into their brains, so this reflex can cause spasms of our diaphragm, which, in the end, leads to hiccups. When we're angry, our lips may twitch. That's also a feature that used to be important for our species. When they wanted to scare away predators or potential danger, they would bare their teeth, the same as bears, wolves, and chimps do. Lip twitching is the first step towards it. Many people want to climb to a higher position or sense the urge to lift their feet when feeling anxious or scared. Evolutionary biologists believe it's because so many early land mammals used to climb trees when they felt a threat coming. Goosebumps are something that we do have, but compared to old times, they're useless now. When hairy creatures felt cold, A reflex would contract those small muscles that make the base of hair follicles. That way, the coat was standing up and trapping more air, so they felt warm. Today, it's just a reminder you need a jacket and that nice feeling you get when hearing your favorite song on the radio. All living creatures can trace their ancestry to a single bacterium from billions of years ago. DNA is that special thing that holds all the information our cells need to know. We all start as one cell that then grows into trillions of them until our body is formed. DNA completely controls our growth, eye color, height, and so many other traits. It's not just humans. Even snakes have hip bones that say they used to have 4 legs, just like their dear cousins, lizards. Dolphins and whales have some kind of small bones in their bodies that show they used to have hind legs. Yup, fossil remains say these marine mammals were once 4-legged and walked on land. To be precise, about 50 million years ago. Evolution doesn't actually track a straight line from species to species. It's more like a huge tree with plenty of branches, where some lead to new ones, a trait there, a trait then, some in, some out, and bam, some completely new species are there. For example, birds. Who would have thought they evolved from dinosaurs? They even lost their teeth along the way. And yeah, both seem to be coming from reptiles. Oh, and those nuts over there, that's part of my family tree. With more than 8 billion people in the world today, it's hard to imagine there was a time when there were so few human beings that they almost went extinct. It happened about 900,000 years ago when our ancient ancestors faced a crisis. Recent studies tell us there were only about 1,280 of them left, which is an incredibly small number. It's like just one village or a very, very small town left alone on the whole planet. The human race got into a population bottleneck where almost 98% of people disappeared, and things were tough for them for more than 100,000 years. We don't completely understand why this happened, but it was likely the result of tremendous changes in Earth's climate. It was a time when periods of cold weather lasted longer, the sea was colder, and there were more glaciers. Monsoons were immensely powerful, and yet there was less rain. These changes had an impact on wildlife species in Africa and Eurasia, and many plants and animals that were food sources for people disappeared. But at some point, our ancestors showed their strength and managed to bounce back despite tough times. The numbers started to go up again because people learned how to handle fire better. Plus, temperatures got warmer too. But what would the world look like if nature had defeated us and it all had really stopped for humanity back then? Let's take a trip to some parallel dimension where it really happened. In that universe, there wouldn't be empires, pyramids, and impressive achievements that some old civilizations left us. No neighborhoods, cities, your favorite park, or that bench where you like to sit and drink your coffee. No coffee. Ouch, that hurts. No pools, adventure parks, and no rush at the beaches. No creature would be able to go to another continent separated by the ocean. There would be no ships or planes that could carry it. Animals would have to wait for tectonic plates to move again to visit new territories. Wow, you've just realized how incredibly silent the world is. All because nature almost never produces as much noise as humans do. Our buildings are noisy, together with cars, motorcycles, and all other vehicles. If you live somewhere by the airport, you know how much noises planes can make too. And here, no one's phone's ringing. You don't hear music coming from bars or gyms. Wow, look how incredibly blue the sky is. You've never seen a sky like that in your world. The rain and wind scrub the surface of our planet clean, although there's not much work to be done since there's no dust and smog humans produce. I mean, there is dust, but a different kind, one that nature creates. We don't really notice it since we have so many heaters and air conditioning systems that blow air and all that dust around. The only drinking water you see is in lakes and rivers, and lots of different animals get together in these areas. It takes a while to get used to it. Wherever you go, there are wild animals passing by. There are no dogs, cats, or other pets you're used to. There's no electricity either. In case you've brought your phone, take pictures as fast as possible because you won't be able to charge your gadget when it runs out of battery. There's no internet though, so you'll be the only one who will see the photos. It's so weird to see grass so tall and wild. No one mows it, so it's hard to walk, especially considering there are no roads. And you don't have a scythe or any other tool that could help you clear your way, because human civilization hasn't reached that level of progress. Wow, there are plants you've never seen before. Every time a tree drops a seed, something new might grow. And there are no humans to select which plants they like and which they don't. You suddenly feel nostalgic, thinking of carrots, broccoli, potatoes, and all other vegetables people once started growing on their farms. You can hear tons of bugs buzzing around. We usually do everything to get rid of them, and now, without humans, you get to see how annoying they really are. Hey, the sun is going down. Without electric lights, all creatures just follow the rhythm of nature. So, if you're up for a late-night walk, wait for the moon and stars to lighten your path. But be aware of night predators. You may face creatures that didn't survive in the world where humans rule. Fire. Luckily, there's a river nearby, so you jump into the water to get to the other side. Fires happen more frequently in the world without humans. For instance, lightning can strike a tree or set a brush on fire. No one is there to put the flames out, so fires just keep spreading until at some point they burn themselves out. It's hard to see the world like this, but it's even harder to accept that Earth is fine without us. Just like it's doing well without dinosaurs, megalodons, woolly mammoths, dodos, and other ancient creatures that went extinct. Back to the research. Some scientists don't think our ancient ancestors were really that close to extinction. To get these results, researchers used FitCoil, a special tool that helps study changes in ancient human populations by looking at the genetic information of modern people. They examined DNA from over 3,000 individuals in Africa and other places for this study. Some believe that the actual population numbers might have been bigger. The method used focuses on a small group of breeding individuals and may not exactly represent the whole population. There may be many archaeological sites in Eurasia and Africa that date back to the time when this population decline might have happened, so it may have affected just some groups of people in certain areas. Either way, not only wasn't it the end, but it was a new beginning. Two ancestral chromosomes combined to create a structure known as chromosome 2 in modern humans. This might have been the start of a new species, because there was a split between our ancestors and other ancient humans, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, our ancient cousins. Some evidence tells us this idea is plausible because our common ancestor lived about 500,000 to 700,000 years ago. Well, humans did survive all those devastating moments in history, but scientists believe that the extinction of our species is a matter of when, not if. Our fields will overgrow, cities will end up in ruins, and bridges will fail. Nature quickly reclaims the landscape where humans don't go. Check out how these roots and trees have taken over the temple in Cambodia. Roman ruins still defy time for over 1,500 years now. Some of the buildings and things we create in the modern world will do it too. Nature will break everything down at some point, and if humans were to go extinct, who would replace us? It took 200 million years for our kind to evolve from the first mammals. Who can repeat this entire process again? The last common ancestor of chimps and humans lived 8 million years ago. Knowing this, it seems possible that if Homo sapiens went extinct, a new species capable of using technologies would evolve from chimps. But hold on. There's something called the Fermi paradox. Even though there are hundreds of millions of rocky planets that could host life in our galaxy, we don't see any evidence of its existence. Our galaxy is 13.5 billion years old, so you can't say life hasn't had time to develop. One possible explanation is that certain crucial steps in the evolution of intelligent life are so rare they hardly ever happen. So, Earth would get along fine without us. The only ones who would care are us. And right now, we need to care a lot.
Phantasmagory is said to be the first animated film ever. It was made in 1908, and it's one of the earliest examples of hand-drawn animation. But did you know that ancient people entertained children with cartoons about 2.6 million years ago? A new study reveals that ancient people were the ones who first made pictures look animated. How? They carved pictures of animals on stones and placed them around fires. When the light starts bouncing around, those ancient animals just can't help but shake it and shimmy. The prehistoric carvings come to life in the flickering firelight, with those animals jumping in and out of focus like they're ready to party. Imagine how fun it would have been for prehistoric families to sit around a fire and create these animated carvings. It turns out that even some of the ancient wall paintings and carvings found in caves were inspired by their appearance in the moving light and shadows of flames. So, basically, these old-timey carvings were made to come to life when firelight hit them. And now researchers made a movie showing that cool effect on a 3D model of some horse engravings. The study says our brains are wired to see moving things in changing light, which is why these carvings probably mattered to our ancestors. In other words, cave people were like, hey, let's carve some cool stuff on this rock, and when we light a fire, it'll look like it's moving. And now these scientists were like, that's awesome! Let's make a movie to show this, everyone! Andy Needham and his teammates used modern scanning and virtual reality tech to study 50 flat carved rocks called plaquettes made of limestone. These rocks were found in southern France back in the 1800s and now sit in a museum in London. They are covered in 77 realistic carvings of all sorts of animals, like horses, reindeer, and chamois. Apparently, Homo sapiens, with a lot of time on their hands, made these engravings a whopping 12,000 to 16,000 years ago. Needham realized that many of these carved rocks were harmed by fire, some covered in white ash, others dried or fractured because of heat. Upon closer examination, he discovered pink bands of discoloration resulting from iron deposits in the stone. What's more interesting is that the animal engravings were often superimposed on top of each other, sometimes even melded together, or fitted around each other like some kind of prehistoric animal jigsaw puzzle. Rather than tossing out the old and starting anew, the ancient artists took animal body parts to create new hybrids. For instance, one of the rocks depicts both a horse and a wild cattle-like creature known as a bovid. In this masterpiece of prehistoric art, the horse's abdomen and neck become the back and neck of the bovid, while the horse's head forms the bovid's ear. What a creative way of recycling. Researchers believe that the prehistoric rocks from Montestoric were used as primetime entertainment for our ancestors. More than one person carved the animals. People from different levels of skills showed their artistic glory, and it was a group effort. The fact that these rocks were found together also suggests that this was a community activity. So it's like families were all gathered around the TV, carving rocks and cheering on their favorite carved animals. Who needs Netflix when you have Paleolithic TV? The engravings on these rocks and the signs they were exposed to heat suggest they were created to look like they were moving. Sometimes you see different animals in different poses, so one would come to life, and then another, and then a different one. It's like a Stone Age version of Disney. Similar techniques might have influenced some of the ancient cave paintings, such as those at the breathtaking Chauvet Cave in southeastern France. The animal portraits there are also overlaid on each other, and some look like they were heated by fires underneath them, which means that our prehistoric ancestors might have been the first animators in the world. Alright, since we talked about young people's favorite pastime activity, shall we take a trip back in time to discover the world's oldest toys? One of the most ancient toys discovered was a simple ball made from clay and found in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. It might seem like a simple toy, but our ancestors were playing with them as far back as 3000 BC. But back then, they didn't have fancy video games or elaborate board games, so a ball was the pinnacle of entertainment. But the Mesopotamians weren't the only ones having fun. In ancient Greece, children played with dolls made of clay. In Egypt, kids had toys shaped like animals, but they also had dolls made from materials like clay, papyrus, and ivory. But the most impressive thing about these dolls? They had movable limbs. That's right, our ancient ancestors were playing with articulated dolls before it was cool. But it's not all fun and games. Toys also had a practical purpose back in the day. In fact, many of the toys discovered by archaeologists were actually used to teach children important skills. For example, Egyptian children played with dolls that were shaped like doctors, which helped them learn about medicine and healthcare. And let's not forget about the toys that were used to train future warriors. In ancient China, kids played with toy horses and chariots. which helped them prepare for a life of battle. Talk about getting a head start on your career. Moving on to primitive board games, which have been around for over 5,000 years. The oldest board game is called Senet and was discovered in ancient Egyptian tombs. It's a bit like a cross between chess and backgammon, and it was so popular that it was played for over 2,000 years. Now that's a game with staying power. But let's not forget about toys for the little ones. Archaeologists have found ancient rattles and whistles that were used to entertain even younger members of their families. And if you thought your kid's toy collection was impressive, just wait until you hear about the ancient Egyptian princess who had over 100 wooden toys in her chamber. But perhaps the most surprising toy of all was the yo-yo. That's right. The yo-yo has been around for over 2,000 years. It was first invented in ancient Greece and was often used in battle, believe it or not. But eventually people realized that it was much more fun to just play with it and do tricks. Marbles are also around as a toy that has been entertaining kids, and some adults, for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found evidence of marble dating back to around 5,000 years ago in the Indus Valley civilization. Back in those days, marbles were made from all sorts of things. Want to take a wild guess? Okay, I'll tell you. Fruit pits and small pieces of smoothed stone. That's right, those ancient kids were getting creative with their playthings. Some artisans even went the extra mile and crafted marbles from clay. Let's head back to ancient Egyptians and their adorable miniature boats made from ivory, wood, and clay. These miniatures may be acknowledged as toys, but they were also meant to represent crossing over to the other side. Viking kids had similar types of items too. A wooden toy boat over 1,000 years old was found on a farmstead near the coast of Norway. This toy looked like a real boat, and it would have been the ultimate cool thing, just like how kids today go nuts over race cars and drones. You can imagine little ones back then showing off their toy boats to their friends. Many of these toys are still pretty fun to play with today. There are many others left aside, like toy soldiers and spinning tops. Do you want to know